Acres. Doug, would you introduce our guest speaker?
Mr. Mayor, we have Tim, where's he?
I'm trying to be casual on the workshop, sir. Sitting on the sidelines.
Here to present a proposal for the 13 and a half acres that we have tonight. Tim, the name of your company is
We tried to make it easy by
1, 2, 3.
but no one can quite get it down. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 plus 3. I guess that would be 4. At any rate, thanks. Tim Nichols. One-to-One Development is the partnership that I so honorably enjoy with my company, which is called Lifestyle Communities, and Ecumen, which is a 125-year-old or something like that nonprofit.
Hey, Tim, just for the record, could you
Yes,
also state your role just so everybody else knows?
My role within the company?
Correct.
I'm the Director of Development, and I'm a partner. So Lifestyle Communities and Ecumen formed a partnership called One-to-One Development. One-to-One Development expressly develops cooperative housing in the metropolitan area. And my partner, Julie Murray, or representing our partner, Julie Murray from Ecumen, will be here tonight. She is a resident of many of you, as many of you might recall from our previous discussions. She's a resident of Victoria and will be here shortly. But really, from my perspective here tonight, and again, even though I think formal, but as informal as we can be, a few things that I've been asked to do is, number one, introduce ourselves again. And I think with that introduction, I think everybody knows who we are. Our focus is housing. Our focus is multifamily housing as it relates to really the genre of rental housing, similar to that which is across the street, cooperative housing, assisted living, memory care, and high-end rental property as well. The bottom line with us as we look at any of the developments that we're involved in around the metro area is what product best fits the marketplace. Our focal point with this partnership with Ecumen was to take the brands that I have been involved with for many years in Summerhill and Gramercy cooperatives, which some of you might know of, and really perpetuate that into the next model, into the next 20 years. I think when we started that, we were 20 years ahead of ourselves, and I think if we didn't look forward more, and again, we would be on par with a typical trajectory with maybe our competitors. We're 20 years ahead because of the thinking that we're doing about how people live and how people age. And my objective was to really go out and find a partner that could connect to what people might want after living developments 20 years. And I saw the aging of some of my Gramercy products, of some of the Summerhill cooperative products. And the nice thing about it was it inspires living. And 20 years after the doors opened to a development that was built 20 years ago, the average age is probably about 20 years older than it was when the people moved in. Average age maybe of a move-in of 60, 20 years later they're 80. Maybe there are some needs that are not being met. Maybe there's the aging process has gone on and there's some connection that people need to assisted living services or even home health care, as the case might be. I embarked on an objective of trying to find a partner that was really deep into that space, but also embraced the fact that I was deep into my space. I know cooperative housing better than anybody. I should. We've done most of it. And we brought these two companies together to really form a dynamic new vision. The vision is to do smaller developments, boutique developments in neighborhoods where people want to stay, not to be the 120-unit option that looks a little institutional, but be the boutique neighborhood cooperative, to pursue cooperatives in communities not unlike Victoria, where people want to be, where we can be an element of that neighborhood, where we can be vital to the people that want to stay but really don't want their large home any longer, but wouldn't sell it because there's really no good alternative. they're probably not the person that would choose to rent an apartment. They're probably not the people that would buy another single-family home. They don't need to move, but they want to move, only if they can stay. It's kind of an abstract thought, right? So if we can come into a community like yours and build the right size product for that age cohort that doesn't need to but wants to move, that are owners, that aren't renters mentally, we can be successful. We can pre-sell those developments and get them done. When we embarked on this thought process here, Ben Landhauser, of course, was here, and Ben brought us in contact with some people. And just as a course of discussion, we started with the Einke Brewery site. That would have required a lot of tax increment financing just to make that work because the site was very expensive. A disproportionate amount of share of that TIF was going to land acquisition, and we felt that that wasn't the best use of asking the city to participate on that level. So we passed on that transaction and looked at the site, the Leitner site, I believe, as a potential, even though that wasn't for sale. We're always looking for opportunities and the gravitational pull of where people want to be, which is walkable downtown here. And that didn't go anywhere fast for a few reasons. And we considered possibly over here, but the fleeting objective was always, what about the property that we're looking at here as discussion tonight? Could we do that? Well, because of the infrastructure cost, we knew that you couldn't just build the infrastructure and then have product come along as time would pass. It wouldn't be financially feasible, we didn't believe. So what we ended up doing is we ended up taking an approach that if we could come to your community with three elements, with a housing element for cooperatives, and there's Julie. Hi, Julie. We've gone through a little bit of the introduction. I'll let you wrap up, my dear. When you live close, you're always late, right?
I was in line for the Croatian holiday because I got here at 5, to be really honest. And I was kind of wedged in between two cars and I couldn't leave.
Well, at any rate, we're talking about a little bit about the evolution. We said, we know we can be successful with the co-op. We've studied the market. We know what people will want to pay. We know the sizes that will work. We know the things that are wanted and needed in that cooperative housing environment. Could we bring another piece? Could we bring a need-driven piece that really is hard to make happen without subsidy? And that would be working with Julie Frick with the Dakota County. Sorry, Julie. I wish this wasn't televised. Come on. I wish it was a quiet room. Now I've screwed up. But the Carver County HRA or CDA with Julie and bringing an affordable rental element. We think those two together work great because people don't segregate and say we're the rich and the poor. There are a group of people that really are a cross-section of all of the people that are here anyhow. And having a combined patio where people can come together and the community at large can come together was kind of our initial thought. Secondly, that's where we're very good. We get housing. We can make that work. We've got an agreement with Julie Frick that if we can pull this off, if we can bring three pieces together, they will go forward with us with their housing development on this site. We will be able to do a cooperative. Those two things we've got covered. There was a third element that was elusive. We tried to get, if you all remember, maybe Lunds Byerly's had really looked hard at that site with us way back when. They passed. People I know have looked at the site that was the Wortman, whatchamajigger, whatever that was called, Village Market or whatever. And that, of course, has its issues, not the least of which it wasn't successful twice. So, that was probably not going to be the grocery store. We really felt that some other synergistic, related, complementary element of that site would be the only thing that would allow us to do the other two legs of the stool, if you will. And we've got through HJ Development, who's not here tonight, but Jeff Curview is a gentleman that has been hard at work attempting to get just that, a grocer. Jeff has reported that he has got a grocer. He's got a very interested grocer, which you I can't divulge as to who that is. That's Jeff's business to do. But he, when that was determined and when it was determined what other things were needed to make that successful in his mind, he was able to then put some dollars amount around that. So what we've got now today in front of you is the really culmination of a lot of hard work. Truthfully, the cooperative and the housing piece are ready to go. It's difficult for most. It's not for us because it's what we do. The third or missing link was really that which HJ Development is able to bring to the table, and they're able to do that with this proposal. So if you're all right with me passing a few things out, that's at least our introduction.
Yeah, please.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you. Julie, for the record, could you come up and introduce yourself, name and position, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Funk, members of the council. My name is Julie Murray. I'm a Victoria resident. I live at 8380 Kelser Pond in Watermark, so this is my home. I'm also the Chief Business Development Officer and SVP of Sales and Marketing for Ecumen. Those of you that have seen us here before know Ecumen is a 150-plus year organization that is headquartered here in Minnesota, Shoreview, Minnesota, that's actually the 25th largest not-for-profit senior housing and services company in the nation. So what we do is senior housing from everything from the truly independent cooperative, where it is really all choice driven that people otherwise would be living in their homes, to, all the way to skilled nursing and many other things that come in between. For me, I'll just kind of say that because I live in this community, and because I'm pretty representative of a lot of people that live in this community in age and demographic, and knowing that my parents are going to want something, to have a place to move to, but not necessarily need-driven senior housing. They're just not at that space. I know the cooperative is very attractive to them. We've had so much success in other markets, and really this is a product that would fit well in our community. And so I'm just really passionate about bringing that product forward here. Anything?
Super. Yeah, it's in Julie's backyard, which is a good thing. Julie's been a supporter of this for years, and I know there was a study some years ago that said senior housing was premature for this area. But when you define senior housing in broad categories, that's true. This is everything but senior housing, and I think if you get the chance to see what we've done, you'll be pleased with that. What's in front of you, if I can just hold this up, is that all right with everyone? Mm-hmm. What's in front of you is, of course, our proposal that exists. Many of you have seen something very similar to this that had some elements that had some retail across the street before this pond was built. But the bottom line is there's a chunk of property here that could or couldn't be associated with the development for now, but clearly the extension of the road into the roundabout, and this all tracks with the work that had been done through your engineering group previously. So this is not theory anymore. This has gone from theory to reality, and this is something that we feel we can deliver and bring to the community and get done. The get done part of that is the senior housing cooperative that we've talked about, the senior rental that we've talked about, the shared kind of park at the terminus of bringing some of the public pathways together, kind of the gathering point to not bring just somebody that owns a co-op or rents from the apartments, but also kind of brings the public through to kind of an overview vista to enjoy the beautiful setting that avails us here in Victoria. The grocer and the related retail represents the size of the grocer that would be required to make sense in this location, and its proximate location on the map relative to some tweaking as the final development plans get brought forth, if this is a proposal that you'd like us to move forth on. There's approximately 40,000 feet of grocer, and there's approximately 10,000 feet of related retail. And we would take advantage of a large parking lot that would be, quite honestly, prominently displayed by a elevation change in the from the existing, decrease in height from the boulevard itself, and then a big hill that goes up and a big retaining wall. So really, the grocer and the parking pad would sit relatively prominently on top of a plateau with great visibility from here. I think this road has been turned to a right out only, if I'm not mistaken. A right in only. And then the road would continue through to Victoria Drive out to the intersection. The idea is to utilize on-street parallel parking to really foster a pedestrian connectivity and closeness to, the ability to stop and shop, to visit, to come and participate in the Vista, maybe have a sandwich in the retail shop and walk across the street and picnic in the promenade that we're contemplating, which is really that connection between the housing. Again, you've done a phenomenal job of negotiating and dealing with this public trail system. We'd want to be a part of that. Again, bringing people into the middle, maybe people coming on a walk, coming up to the site, as the case might be. But the bottom line is, a 60-unit housing cooperative, approximately, a 60-unit senior rental. Those would have underground parking. They'd be 4 stories. They'd be very similar in nature as far as exterior materials, all of the things that you would want to have happen in a community to be consistent with the first-class bedroom community that you are. Grocer and retail then would share those similar characteristics and would be real complementary in development. Our whole philosophy to date has been velocity, being the kind of the buzzword, if you will. And velocity meaning this all can happen within a couple of years' worth of construction cycles. The housing would lead the charge with its development, followed by the grocer and retail, based on the simple fact that there's no beds or bedrooms or people that move into the grocer. That's a rather quick build. So we feel that we can build the housing in advance of the grocer retail, but still wrap up everything with about 6 months of each other, which would really complete that plateau development in about a 24-month period from start to finish. Our property here on the senior housing, cooperative housing element is all pre-sold. We are very fortunate to have worked on, our sales staff has worked hard on a development. I guess we developed it in the right place with the right price point for the right reasons, and we did the right things, really the right way. It's a lot of rights, I realize. But the bottom line with that is that turned out, before we started construction, we were 100% pre-sold. That's our newest property that's under construction now. Every one of these developments that I've been involved with exceed 65% occupancy on initial endorsement or construction start. And then prior to our conclusion or prior to our completion, which is generally a 12-month construction contract, we're 100% sold with a waiting list. That's the cooperative element. The senior rental element is simply successful before it starts because the quality of what Julie Frick and her staff focuses on and the need for an affordable, great place to live in a vibrant location through the HRA is needed as an understatement. There's a tremendous need for that good product. And we know that that will be quickly filled and it'll be operated efficiently, clearly, by their connection, good reputation. Those two elements, along with HJ Development, developing and managing this with people that they know and have done business with in the grocery business for many, many years, results in the owners who occupy the co-op being here long-term. The CDA, long-term owner. And HJ Development, long-term owner. They're not buyers and sellers. We're not trying to reap the rewards in a quick sell. We're trying to do what's right for the community for the long haul. And we believe, with no exception, that that's good for us in the process. Again, the right things, the right way for the right reasons. I could talk about that for about a day. This is a little taste of what we have. It is my formal presentation, and I know we're televised, which is not typically the case in this type of venue. But I would tell you that we are sure open for any questions. And the most important thing I can tell you through our discussions with Doug, with Aaron, we're not fighters of City Hall. We're lovers, not fighters, And we know that if we can align this and get the right things done, we can accomplish great things for the community. And that's great for us. If it's not going to work, we sure would rather know that up front. I think it has a sporting chance of working, at least being accepted. We're not asking for subsidy, but we are not able to pay a never-ending high price for this site. I've got some thought process on how to perceive the payments that we're able to make, but as I understand it, that payment is not quite enough to make the payment on what will be the infrastructure on that entire expansion of the municipal expansion of your road and the public sewer, water, park, lighting system, the whole 9 yards. It's an expensive proposition. We can surely put a big dent in, if not cover almost all of that. But it's up to you, I think, to how you process the idea of what we're able to pay. And I'd leave it at that for this discussion now, and of course answer any questions that you all might have. Aaron first, and Doug, have I done a reasonable justice to our previous discussions?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Tim. A couple of things I just want to make sure I heard right. Both the senior cooperative and the senior rental are 4 stories, and both are 60 units?
Approximately, yes.
Okay, so these are the current estimates, if you will?
That's correct.
Do you know if the CDA was talking about market rate rentals, or is it subsidized housing that they were planning on putting in theirs?
It would be affordable. It would be affordable housing, correct. Mm-hmm. Affordable rental housing.
Okay. Do you have anybody lined up for the 2 retail buildings, or is that just proposed?
No, and again, just to be abundantly clear, that's really HJ Development's forte, and the answer would be yes, they do, or they wouldn't have proposed it. They have users. I think Jeff said to even get something going, we got to have 50% of it earmarked. And I would expect that he'd approximately 5,000 square feet that he would know of, with maybe a speculative 5,000 thereafter.
Thank you. One last question. Clearly, there's a lot of details that have got to be worked out, the financials and the other part.
Yes, sir.
If I'm not mistaken, I thought at one point, and maybe this is not accurate, but I thought the state would require us to close that access to Highway 5.
I think there's an answer to that relates to the discussions that the engineers have had, and that's why I believe there's only a right-in at that location, but not a right-out, because it's too close to this intersection to accelerate. So as somebody's coming this direction, sir, they'd be able to come into the site, but then to leave the site, they would go out Victoria Road to the intersection here.
Got it. So one final question.
Yes, sir.
Is that been confirmed by MDOT, or is that just what we think based on initial discussions? And then secondly, the follow-up, given the traffic flow coming out and that intersection's already problematic, did the state say anything about requiring a roundabout or a light at Victoria Drive and Highway 5 there, right by the Dairy Queen?
I can answer both in saying I'm not 100% sure. The engineers that are on that have done work for the city at the city's request have come up with the fact that we can and will be able to access through here, and then the right in only here, and of course through the downtown this way, of course. But I don't know of any specific dialogue. It hasn't been had with me, sir, directly.
Got it. One final question. Do you have this drawing superimposed over the entire 13.5 acre site so that I can see?
This is it.
That's it. So that's occupying the entire site.
Yep. The
Okay.
whole site is something like this. I mean, Aaron, potentially, I don't know if we could get an electronic version of that up, but this is effectively the site, sir.
Yeah, thank you. That answers the question. So I appreciate that. Council, I'm sure there's other questions. Who would like to go?
Tim, just a question about the grocery store. You mentioned 40,000 square feet,
Approximately, Jim, yes.
twice the size roughly of what was Fresh Seasons, or how?
Yeah, I think it's not quite twice, but it's significantly larger. And I think, just to speak on behalf of HJ, you know, it is a grocer of a caliber that you would expect, that would want to be here. And it does have the gravitational pull that it needs at that size to be successful. So I think you're taking away the speculation that a boutique grocer that maybe doesn't have a name brand would add, you know, question as to its long-term validity. I think when we divulge this, you'll be happy to know that these people know what they're doing.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any idea on that timeline where we can get those details or get something from HJ Development?
HJ Development is planning, and there's a good site there, and there we go. HJ Development is planning on coming in, discussing with us as a follow-up to this. Again, you know, I don't want to be presumptive. I don't know what you're all thinking, but I can tell you what we're thinking, and I know that HJ, you know, is a really first-class group that wants to spend time doing things that we can do together, and they're committed to it. I would suggest, Mr. Mayor, that would be as we progress through this process here in the next few months.
Perfect. Thank you.
Another
Go ahead.
question on the grocery store. Would this grocery store want a liquor store and a car wash, that kind of thing?
No, I don't know about the liquor store. I can't talk specifically for that, but it's not the quintessential, you know, big footprint. You know, it's not the 90,000 square foot hog that you might be thinking of that comes along with a car wash and a fuel store. It's that second tier, large footprint name brand.
So in terms of looking at the infrastructure, your infrastructure calculations, did they include that retaining wall,
Correct.
which would be quite substantial?
Mm-hmm.
So you put together some numbers. Someone has numbers that would indicate your costs and broken down in some degree of detail.
That's correct.
And you have reason to believe that the total of those costs exceeds the value of the land, or
Well,
what
it's
are you
more
thinking?
it's more driven on the formula is really more driven on cost for the development and the reality of the revenue that needs to be charged to generate enough cost to return an investment for that particular property. And you know, without strapping a grocer with too high of a burden of debt service and, you know, payment, you have to find that balance, which if Jeff were here, you would understand that as deeply as I know housing, Jeff knows his business, which is a nice combination. We don't want to be everything to everyone. We want to be the right thing to the right group of people, but together can really accomplish that. I would defer for Jeff, Tom, if you would, to answer all the specifics about that, but I can tell you I've seen spreadsheets, I've seen analysis, and he's got sensitivity analysis that you wouldn't even believe. And he's a deep thought on this topic. So he's done enough work to know he can deliver at the price point that achieves a desired grocer for this use. And that's what's important to me, because literally without that, we got a stool we got to balance on, and I'm not into balancing. I'm into some, you know, terra firma. You know, sit down on a three-legged stool and make it work.
Can you, so four-story, 60-unit buildings, we've had quite a bit of negative comment about the height of this building here.
Right.
And and that one's kind of, it's probably shorter than these, but that's my question, is what would the height be? And then if I remember correctly, the site where these are sitting is somewhat elevated from the road, right? It's back from the road, but it's kind of the high point on that property. Is that correct?
It really is, and I think, I was sitting here as well looking at this, and I've got an opinion. I mean, everybody that does something in this industry has one. Not everyone has a good opinion, right? Everybody has an opinion. Not everyone is good, but very specifically, the differences, not being subjective but objective. The differences are the magnitude of this being close to everything else makes it appear bigger than it is. In a field, if you will, or in a green field on a bluff, from across the way, it'll look large. There's no question about it. But with a big, massive 40,000 square foot building here, will really diminish the mass or the amount of property that building takes up. It will be higher, clearly, than the grocer. But because of the area that it serves, this large area of development, of which some is just clearly undevelopable, it does kind of sit on an island in and of itself. And I think following the train of that hillside really takes advantage of the fact that you are on a plateau. The plateau is on a hill. It is noticeable, but it's not going to be out of place as far as the development mass goes relative to the rest of the development on the bluff.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the comparison of co-op versus rental, and in terms of target demographics and then also tax capacity?
Wonderful. I sure can do both. Yes, sir. The reality is I've developed 28 cooperatives. And about this time of year, after we just built the one in Glen Lake that's been open 9 months now or something, 8 months now. And about this time of year, we send out a questionnaire, and generally about number 16 or so. And the question is, if we wouldn't have built this, where would you have moved? The overwhelming answer, if not completely 100% answer, but at least the vast majority answer, 90-some-odd% of the people will say we wouldn't have moved, which is an interesting situation because that befuddles the marketplace. The demographers all want to say, well, I want to talk to the people, and here's that mass of people. The renter population is going to be bifurcated into these smaller groups. Those can afford you, those. It's not a rental. So these people that are here make up a distinctively different population. And they're people that are perfectly content living in the home they live in. And they don't need to move. It's not a market-driven or not a need-driven move. It's a market-driven move. People say, this was the right choice for me in the right location, being pivotal, at the right price. And this cooperative model that we have is really kind of the best of rental and ownership because typically a person that's moving into one of our cooperatives would sell a home. You might just say, pick a number, $400,000 home that they might have, or $350,000 home. Typically, if you're buying a condominium or a townhome, you'd either reinvest all of that or you'd go out and get an individual mortgage. In a cooperative, the ownership structure is established into two pieces. And you own a share in the cooperative corporation and get a perpetual right to occupy whichever unit you choose to occupy in the development. You can customize it and do all the things as an early owner. But the elements that make up that purchase are a share payment and a monthly payment. And the monthly payment doesn't involve a for-profit motivated somebody that's next door, I don't mean next door here, but that's going to continually raise your rents to increase their profitability. It's your development, and the only expenses you're going to pay are the expenses that are equal to the cost of operating your development. You share in a prorated piece of that. Also, it allows you to come in at that share payment. We've got different tiers, but most people pick approximately a third of its value. So maybe you're buying a cooperative that might be worth $300,000, but you're only putting $100,000 in cash into it. But you've sold a home that might be worth $400,000 that might be paid for, or close to fully paid for. The individuals that find value in cooperative ownership then are able to take that additional equity that they have from the sale of their home, buy into a cooperative where their monthly charges are mostly fixed, about 60% in that 30% model is fixed for the term of the mortgage, 40 years. And the other remaining costs are only going to go up to you as one of the cooperative owners as a cost of those utility costs going up or different things, taxes, et cetera. So that purchaser is truly that. They're a homeowner. And they live like a homeowner. They're taxed like a homeowner. And they go to sell their share in the cooperative corporation 20 years down the line, if that was the case, and they're selling it for a fixed appreciation amount. And they're only selling the share payment that they invested in. 20 years from now, that $100,000 share payment will be worth $140,000. The next person in line purchases the $140,000 share. The owner gets their $140,000 back, or their estate, and the next person steps into the 40-year fully amortizing master mortgage that you were in. It's a great way to have a perpetual affordable model with an ease of entry, ease of exit to the consumers that find it valuable, and there are a lot of them. From a tax perspective, the cooperative will be just that. Now, there's probably going to be $200,000 worth of tax revenue. It's a round number, I know, but we'll refine that as we get a little bit closer, but that's probably close, of permanent tax revenue that will be generated that isn't there now. Annually. Yep, annually. And that will be taxed just like a residential home would be taxed, okay? The senior rental produces a payment in lieu of tax, which is a payment, but not as substantial as this, and we can get that down, so you know what's happening, but it might be $50,000 or something like that. And then the grocer, of course, well, it's just for the record, I guess I'll say from Jeff's perspective, they're disproportionately taxed in the state of Minnesota. But that's his opinion, not mine. At any rate, there will be a lot of tax revenue generated from the grocer and from the retail as well. And that's, I know, a broad brush to taxation, but the senior rental does not pull in the same amount of tax that a market rate un-CDA owned or non-CDA owned community might, but it produces tax nonetheless.
And is the payment in lieu of taxes, is that a calculation, or is that up to the sort of free will of the property owner?
I think it's a calculation, sir.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think one of the strongly held interests of at least some are that the buildings be quote-unquote mixed use. So retail on the ground level of the housing buildings, for example. Is there any element of that in this?
No, and I would stray from that firmly. And the reason I would, sir, is in fact, we're involved in the development in Apple Valley, Minnesota, where I think there was 60,000 square feet of retail with housing above the whole thing prior to the downturn. It was planned. I ended up convincing the city of Apple Valley that we should really segregate that. And I didn't mind mixed use, but vertical mixed use is very difficult to pull off and to make work. If one of the two elements is not doing well, it sucks down the other one, for lack of a more televised phrase. It impacts negatively, let's say, the successful element. If retail isn't thriving, it makes the housing appear not so good, or vice versa. So and combining those two, we're doing a development in St. Paul right now where somebody put up a multifamily housing development, and lack of being rude, they're not the most sophisticated at this. At the risk of being rude, they ended up putting a ventilation system in exterior to the building post-development that just looks horrible. So to marry those physical uses with somebody that you don't know is going to be there a few years from now is very difficult to do and do right. But I'm a proponent of horizontal mixed use in lieu of vertical mixed use. So I think this accomplishes the mixed use goals of the site. And it does it in a way that we know we can be successful.
I just had two other kind of minor questions. One is, do you know what the distance is sort of just from, I don't know, the closest point, or maybe let's take the center of that roundabout there to this portion of downtown. So say the other end of the bridge. It's not on your
Like down here.
Yeah.
That'd be down here. Geez, I don't know, a couple thousand feet? 3,000 feet? I mean, who could do a better job of estimating that than I?
This might take a minute if you have another question.
Well, you're crunching your numbers there. Let me ask the last question, which was, is there any developable land remaining once you do this build out?
Yes, this piece, sir.
Okay. And now what is that?
It's kind of difficult to get to be quite honest, kind of mentally. And I know that would, again, be a great discussion for Jeff because he just hasn't figured that out yet. There's got to be something going on down there, but it really exists with this existing kind of development that really needs to be thought out. I think when you really look at doing this, something really should be done kind of as a master plan over the balance of that site in conjunction with the current property owners.
Is that last piece part of the 13 and a half acres?
Yes, sir.
Is that privately owned?
Yep, that's yours.
Okay.
So you really own, well, you don't own this little piece down here, but you own everything to here. And the road continues right now.
Yeah, right, just through your pond, I think.
So by and large, I think we have a graphic up on the screen. You can see exactly how that works currently and how that would fit through the development. And this blue line depicting kind of the, if you will, almost the trajectory into the site.
And then-
utilizing the Steger Lakes. No one can really tell me how to pronounce that. I feel I'm
Been
not so
told
bad
that-
because some of the people in town pronounce it differently. The same person does in two different discussions. But at any rate, that road is the connection out to the one-way.
So it's 2,000 feet to the middle of downtown.
Okay.
Is that what it is? That was a pretty good guess on my part, huh? Educated guess. That's good.
So it's less than a half a mile. Very walkable.
Here's the deal, guys. We're looking at, we're looking at how we have to predict and inspire something to happen somewhere, right? So if we can't be successful here, we have to figure out how do we make the gravitational pull of that kind of connect up with somewhere else. And I think you've got an opportunity. Well, the people that were involved know it. You had a vision, and that vision was some years ago, you did what you needed to do, and here's what you've got. Another guy might come in and say, we can do a tax increment financing district, and we'll do this, that, and the other thing. I say, do your own tax increment financing district. Just don't, you can't take a lot of money out of the deal up front, but that'll help us get the velocity that we need to make this successful more quickly. In so doing, that frees up all of the tax revenue that you could otherwise have paid to a TIF district, but it's more efficient because you don't have to take something off the top. It goes into your coffers. So I look at this as, yes, we need some assistance from you. The assistance from you is buying into the vision at the price that we can reasonably afford to pay to make this happen, and work forward on the basis of a relationship, kind of a private-public partnership of sorts, doing something that you want to see happen in a fashion that allows us, we can't gold plate the faucets or the siding or things like that, but we can do some rather inspirational things with your help.
Tim, one more
Mr.
question.
Vickers, could I speak first? First of all, I realize we're very preliminary in all these discussions.
Yes, sir.
And we need to work out the numbers. But just from my perspective, I'm glad that you're here. I'm excited that you're here.
Thank you.
The proposal that you're bringing forward is is highly desired. Senior housing, grocery store, top of everyone's list. So I'm glad you're here. Hope we can continue to work forward. The one element that's changed is the part that I was most excited about, and that was you're going to put a grocery store in between, or a restaurant in between those two buildings.
And from this perspective, it's really even though we're calling it retail, it's commercial retail.
Right.
The reality of that is we've got to find the right fit. We would like that. We would like that because, number one, we drive. I'll tell you as an example. We're developing a property in Apple Valley right now. As I told you, I talked them down from 60,000 square feet of retail. Now we've got over 300 units of rental housing in that community with no retail underneath it. We've got a 134 unit Seasons building, which is need-driven property owned by Ecumen. We worked on it together. We've got a co-op coming of 58 units that's starting construction next month. And the remaining piece is about 20,000 feet of retail. And the one element that we've got so far, the first thing we've got is a restaurant.
But you changed it. The gathering space between the two buildings I thought was really cool.
I think it was, nor will we end up having this exactly. Remember, we had an element over here, which I thought was really neat, but it got so close to this water. I mean, it would have been a very good view. I kind of think it would have been right in the drink. But so we were unable to do that. So we have to work this out. But the question really becomes, how do we do that so it fits as good as it can? And the idea is not to show you the precise dimensions of what we're talking about, but generally the massing of how a 40,000 footprint would work and a 10,000 footprint might work. We might end up having a big corner here with parking around it. And that's on the drawing board. There's about 13 different options that come with every thought, particularly relating to here. This is pretty much what you see is what you're going to get.
For those two storm ponds, have they been calculated by an engineer?
All of it.
Looking at the impervious surface, calculating how
Yep.
much of a pond we need, or are both of them
Yes.
storm ponds?
They're both engineered to handle the appropriate infiltration, water runoff, and the rate of flow that would be required for this development through the engineering that was done by, I was going to say Bronistru, but I don't think that's right now.
Stantec.
Was it?
It was Stantec.
Oh, Stanzak. Yeah, Stanzak.
Okay, so we can't mess with that design there.
Unless we float something over it, I suppose that's an option.
So Tim, a question.
Yes, sir.
Final question I had was, what's the approximate square footage between the senior cooperative and senior rental units?
The square footage of the buildings?
The individual units.
Oh, the individual units from the cooperative would generally be 1,000 to about 1,800. So they'd be rather large on some of them. One of the things that we've been driving constantly, and it's hard to get in the psychology of the buyer's head, but we have so much common space, or community space, if you would. We're told at one point in time, I didn't want to take any more questions from a reporter who kept driving about the common space. I said, there's nothing common about it. Don't call it common space anymore. It's uncommon space. So I was listed as the uncommon developer, right? Because we develop uncommon space. The reality of that is that common space really is an extension of everyone's home. And once people move in, almost all of them say, well, we didn't need our 1,800. We could have bought our 15 and been more at home, just as much at home. So we're really trying to do some good education, and so that 1,000 to 1,800 with the standard of being about 1,350. Most people are buying that 1,350 middle 2-bedroom, 1.5, 2 baths, maybe down to 1,100 for a 1-bedroom den, 1 bath. All of them with screen decks, all of them with really well-appointed elements. Part of our mantra is, you don't have to upgrade to get the things you want. They come within a standard price point, People maybe upgrade to get a fireplace, which is not standard. People maybe upgrade to get different types of flooring, which is their choice as a first-time home buyer. But ultimately, that's generally the range of that. And from in the rental, the range is probably about 700 to about 1,100 on the lion's share. And part of our challenge or our responsibility is to develop something that's buildable at a price that the CDA can afford. So we're all about livability in units. We're all about efficient development of units. And the better we can do that and the more talent that we can drive into the development process and the planning process, the more money we can spend on the exterior of the building as opposed to wasting space on the inside. And we do a really good job of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Real quick, I want to make sure I understood what I heard. On the rental, you said their average is 700 to 1,100 square feet, and there's 60 units. But the cooperative is 1,000 to 1,800 square feet, also 60 units.
Right.
So,
And really what we're depicting here is the massing of the size of the building that can be accommodated in the footprint that we have available. But what we'll end up seeing is this building, in practicality, could be a floor smaller, covering the same footprint, or it could be a shorter building or a stair-step building that has the ends that aren't as prominent that step into the hallway on that level that make the mass feel a little bit smaller. It likely could be a 3-story building.
so that would be, so these buildings won't be necessarily identical in size. The CDA building could end up being smaller.
Smaller if it's the same height. If it's not the same height, it would be approximately the same footprint.
All right, thanks.
Yep, and then the architectural elements of that would be very similar. The CDA building cannot afford to have screen decks on all of them. So we're not going to develop a project or a community that looks like we ran out of money. There's going to be elements of this building in that building, but there's going to be a similarity but a distinctive difference that doesn't appear that we've left off the balconies or something like that. We're going to challenge our architects a little bit.
Council, other questions?
What's the next step?
Pull a building permit and get to work. I'm kidding. Honestly, I think if you're amenable to this discussion, it's really sitting down, drilling down with the team to get a development proposal going forward, getting timelines associated with that, and getting some real benchmarks that we can achieve that you can expect. Work together towards that goal. A new thing is really called the P3, right? Public-private partnership. Somebody came to me from Arizona and said, well, we want to have you involved in this P3. I said, what, P3? What is this? And they said, well, it's this great new tool. It's called a public-private partnership. I said, we've been doing that for 30 years. And it's true. Conjoining a vision and working hard to achieve it.
Do you need a motion or consensus, or what do you need, Doug?
Thumbs up.
Well, I think you could do a motion if you want to, or just if there's any dissension on it, I think it would be good for him to hear now. But
I am in favor of moving forward. Continue the discussions, please.
Thank you.
In that continuing discussion, we'll hear more specifics about acquisition costs, infrastructure costs, and who's bearing that and how that model looks. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I would bring to your point, Tom, earlier, we'll bring our estimates of the tax revenue so you can understand the bigger picture as well as the, just the snapshot in time as we start.
Right. Perfect.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Vogt?
Go forward, quickly, immediately.
Councilmember
Like
Gregory?
that?
Yes, sir. All for it. Looks good.
Thank you, Tom.
Sounds like it's unanimous. Clearly, everybody wants to get the details behind it. But Tim, on behalf of the council, I appreciate you coming in and sharing this with you. Look forward to getting more information. Council, any final comments?
I think the next time we meet, we really should see quite a few numbers.
I agree. We'll be happy to share those, and again, it's kind of rolling up our sleeves and really getting the economic model in shape, so you can fully understand what we can accomplish and what your responsibility would be in this public-private relationship. So I'm absolutely prepared to do that, sir.
That's exactly our responsibility. We need to get to that fairly quick.
I'm with you. I understand it, Tom, and I appreciate that. And the work that we're doing on this or anything else, if this is something that you guys want to work on and move full steam ahead, we won't slow you down. And I can tell you that as I'm standing here today.
All right, super. Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll take a short recess, and we'll start the council meeting in about 5 minutes. Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Tim.
Mayor. Julie, is that yours? Yeah. I knew it wasn't mine.
Very cool.
Well,
There's still a lot of work
That's a
ahead.
good idea, though.
can I leave it?
Yeah,
Thank you very much for coming again.
restaurant, so they don't have to go outside in the winter. I don't like to go outside. But anyways, but I'll
It's early days, as they say in English, it's early days.
oh, absolutely. I know. It's all plugging in.
Thank you.
Tim, it's safe to say this is very similar, at least in design and function, like Glen Lake. Perfect.
Yes, sir. Good to see you.
Thank you. We'll be in touch. Yeah. I thought it went well.
Retirement's hard to get to stick, isn't it? Does he still? There's a lot of people that fought for retirement, so don't feel bad. Because those of us that are used to working have a real big challenge with not working.
Is that okay? We didn't embarrass you.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah. Aaron, I just wanted to introduce
Gold mine for the city.
I'm like, it's saying, who's like, I'm like, I
It is. Well, right, but supermarket, I mean, taxpayers, everything.
okay, about to.
I mean, there's,
So did you, were you
lots of good things.
Ben.
okay, all right, that makes sense.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to meet you.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
I think it can work, especially with the sidewalk where they have that plan, parallel parking alongside, going all the way through. It can work. We've got condos just across the bridge, big shoppers for that. So, yes.
Try. We sometimes just like go at it. I don't think it actually works, but.
Cool off.
Good, how are you? Smooth sailing?
Lost your mind.
It's 2 motions, only donations. this. 4 slides.
Okay. Click, click, click.
Yep.
Okay. Doing all kinds of stuff though here.
No.
That's fine.
Well, there's a,
There's a proposal, the Gedney site. It's, yeah, that one. But I had sent, I got a screenshot of it from Greg Bow and sent it to Doug to print it out, so.
Sure. Right, well, yep.
So anyways, I had sent it to him this morning and it didn't come through, so I kind of crashed it out a second time later.
Both have to learn how to work
And then
that.
I
temperamental,
just wanted to, but I
learned that a few
had asked that a hard copy be on the desk. I didn't see it, but it's in the presentation, so we don't need a hard copy. It's fine.
Should be plenty. It doesn't feel like it's 75. Laura used to have a thermometer up here, and the temperature difference.
I'm trying to think what, if this is like,
8 degrees. Oh, she still got it.
yeah.
I'm not sure. Like 70 right?
Did you get the sense of who's putting that trail in? Is that part of the city or is that park district?
Not that hard.
It may be that we'll get to something.
We're always cold, right?
That's my thought, but I'm also trying to figure out, because I know these things are gonna get shut
I
down.
had this certainly going to screw
I
this.
suppose that's what this is for, is to serve that, but as that gets worse, you gotta do it in a way that doesn't completely screw that guy.
Yeah.
Well,
Did Aaron have to go? Yeah.
they don't have anything on. So.
Yeah.
like they're shooting cold air right now.
Just to torture us.
All of you come. Okay, there you go. I know, I'm glad. I'm like, nobody's gonna come. Nobody's gonna wanna come.
That was just in November, right? They didn't make any kind of presentation, did they? Or was there slides or anything? So much more information.
It's going to take us just a minute. We're waiting to get something in the back, so just please bear with us for a few more minutes. Thanks.
What are we waiting on?
Doug's having to see if he gets something in the back. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
We need the guy in the video room. Ready?
We're set.
Good evening, everybody. I call to order the February 12, 2018 meeting of the Victoria City Council. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Doug, any changes from you on the agenda?
Mr. Mayor, no, there's a resolution to go with the site for the yard waste, but it's on your table in there, but it was not with the original agenda.
Got it. Council, changes to the agenda? Okay, I move we adopt, or we add an item to the agenda. Doug, I'd asked to put legal fees on here. I don't see it. So I move that we add the payment of the personal legal fees for Thomas O'Connor, James Crowley, Thomas Striegel, Lonnie Bassa, as it pertains to the ongoing Supreme Court case as the first item under new business. Is there a second?
So I question whether or not that's possible, given that that's a discussion item that has been had before, it has been voted down, and according to Robert's Rules of Order, you cannot be in the negative and bring an item back up before council. And additionally, if you are going to bring it back up before council, I believe it has to be done according to Robert's Rules of Order during the same meeting. And I defer to the attorney about whether this is appropriate or not.
So before we do that,
I ask the attorney to comment, please, sir.
Bob, go ahead.
So Mayor and Councilmember Crowley, so you're suggesting that the item would be a motion to reconsider an action already taken. If that's correct, and I guess I'm not presenting it to add it to the agenda, and I'm not the maker of the motion, so I don't know what it is, but if that were true, if it were a motion to reconsider, you're right that a motion to reconsider needs to be made at the meeting where the action has been taken, and would need to be made by a person, a council member in the prevailing side. But I don't know what the nature of the motion is or nature of the action item is.
Given that the motion was specific to the ongoing Supreme Court case, which is a new action that's never been discussed before by the council, it is not an item that this council has considered before. Therefore, I do not believe it's an issue that has already been discussed. Therefore, the motion is on the table. And before we go further, I want to make sure that this is clearly understood, that according to the League of Minnesota Cities, council members cannot partake in a discussion where they have a personal and direct financial interest or an indirect financial interest in an item. Specifically, the motion was the payment of the personal legal fees for the two current council members, the two former council members, as it relates to the case that is currently pending before the Supreme Court. So that motion is on the table. Do I have a second?
Well,
I'll second that for the point of discussion.
We're in discussion. Do you?
Okay.
well, I was looking for my opportunity to.
Yep, go ahead.
So, I guess I'm confused. New item, as you noted, and in the March, I think 14th meeting, there was a vote that was about the go-forward policy.
That was April 10th, I
Said that-
believe.
Excuse me. Do I have the floor?
You do, but it was April 10th. But please
That,
proceed.
The policy of the council is to provide legal defense for the elected officials. As such, I don't understand why we would vote about whether we're going to follow policy or not.
So is what you're saying is that you voted on a policy to approve the payment of your personal legal fees?
No, but I think you're aware of that. The vote was taken as a go-forward vote. As you've noted, new issue. Therefore, go forward. Therefore, it is related to the conduct of council duties, and the policy of this council is that it provides legal defense for its elected officials. That's what this is, and it wouldn't matter whose defense it is, could be yours, but that is the policy. And so, as such, I don't think it's up for a vote for whether we're going to decide to follow policy or not.
So there's two questions I have here. First off, you're in discussions about payment of your personal legal
we're in
fees.
Discussion about a policy. You're trying to add something to the agenda which is inappropriate because it violates policy.
Right, and you're trying to keep something off of the agenda so that the rest of the council can't talk about the payment of your personal legal fees.
No.
So
And you are conflicted too, Mr. Mayor. We've already had that vote.
well, nobody gets to decide whether I have a conflict other than me by myself.
Mr. Attorney, please.
Mr. Mayor, can I have the floor?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, under item, new business, item F, it's the Attorney General discussion. And in the staff report, we're indicating a possible discussion about whether or not to seek a declaratory judgment with regard to legal fees. So, in my opinion, I feel like we already have legal fees on the agenda within that discussion of attorney fees.
And again, I think that's completely incorrect. There's two separate
Okay,
topics. There's two separate topics.
That's fine, but can we let Mr. Vos weigh in on that?
Yeah, so Mayor and Council, I guess, riffing off the point you're making, I'm not sure I'd make the same point, but related point. So, new business item F is, at least in part, it looks like it's raising two sort of different issues, but at least in part, one of the issues is the mayor had declared himself conflicted with respect to reimbursement. He changed his view on that. The council voted that he is conflicted. He got a legal opinion, Mayor, you got a legal opinion saying that you're not conflicted, and then I issued a legal opinion saying that you are conflicted. So clearly, there is a living dispute or a living disagreement at this point about what your conflict, whether you have a conflict and what that conflict means with respect to the issue you're trying to add to the agenda. So I don't think I'm making a legal point technically, but it just seems as a matter of prudence, as a matter of common sense. There is an item on the agenda tonight about what to do about the difference of opinion about whether you have a conflict on the very issue you're seeking to add to the agenda. So doesn't it, let me just offer it up, doesn't it make sense to reach some understanding on item 6F, what is the city going to do about my opinion and the council's opinion that you're conflicted, what's going to happen with respect to that issue before we add to this agenda or any agenda that very item? I mean, it seems we don't know the answer to that question yet.
Well, actually, I do. Can you cite a statutory basis that allows the council to vote that another council member has a conflict of interest?
Well, Mayor and Council, I've given you my written legal opinion. It's not a single statute. It's a whole bunch of legal authorities. You've got that. The primary authority is the same authority that your lawyers cited. So you're in agreement about the legal authority for deciding.
And my attorney says I do not have a conflict. So there's a difference of opinion. Ultimately, that decision rests with the elected official. It doesn't reside with you or this council. Each individual council member gets to decide for themselves. Is there any case law or statutory basis that refutes that?
Yeah, Mayor and council members, you've got my written legal opinion. You've had it for months. It speaks to that question. I don't have it in front of me tonight.
Right.
I'm happy to recite it to you if I had it in front of me, but you've had it, and it cites authorities for the proposition that council members that are legally conflicted, their vote either shouldn't happen in the first instance, or if it does happen, it should not count. And I acknowledge, Mayor, that you don't agree with that. You don't agree with me about that, and you've got a legal opinion that doesn't agree with that. There is a difference of legal opinion about whether you're conflicted, and if you are conflicted, what the consequence of that is. And that is what F on the agenda is intended to resolve. So I don't disagree that you and I disagree about that. That's what F on the agenda is meant to address.
So do I have
Doesn't F also devolve into what we should do with legal fees as far as should we seek a declaratory judgment to let a judge determine the determination of the legal fees?
Mayor.
Go ahead.
Yes, so as I said, council member, 6F, I think, raises or seeks to raise sort of two related but not the same issues. And I think the other issue is the one you're suggesting, which is taking a different approach to resolving, I think, different questions in a different forum. So I don't know what the bounds of item 6F are. I don't know, and maybe your interim city manager wants to speak to that, but you're right. There are sort of two issues that I think are raised under 6F. One of them is the mayor's conflict and what to do about it. The other is some other set of issues.
So I object to you saying the mayor's conflict. That's assuming you're right. Clearly, there's other attorneys that disagree with you, and my own attorney says I do not have a conflict. So I would like you to explain where my personal financial interest is when it comes to the payment of the legal fees of somebody who's been found by a court to have intentionally violated the open meeting law. Where does my conflict arise from? I am not a petitioner in the Supreme Court case.
So, Mayor,
I beg to differ, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking at the document that came from the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Gildia. The top of the document, it says Thomas Funk et al., petitioners. Your name is on this petition.
So let me address that.
It's very hard for me to believe that you don't have anything to do with this case and you're not conflicted in any decision making and it doesn't affect you in any way. It's hard for me to believe it. It's on your name is at the top of the document that came from the Supreme Court.
Okay.
It's on the system of record of the Supreme Court, too, if you
And
can look at their system of record.
Okay, I now have the floor. The legal process, my name will be attached to that all along. That doesn't mean that I'm still a petitioner. I officially withdrew from the case along with my wife. If you look at the other document, the actual petition that was submitted to the Supreme Court, it lists all of the petitioners and it lists all of the respondents. Petitioners are the plaintiffs, responders are the defendants. If you look at that document, the document that the Supreme Court issued or accepted for review, it does not list me, nor does it list my wife. Mr. Vos, would you please confirm that fact?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, so I was asked two questions prior to that, so taking them in the order they were asked. First of all, I'm referring to your conflict because that's the position of the City Council, which is my client. So I'm just referring to my client's position, which is that you're conflicted. Secondly, you asked what is the authority for the idea that you have a personal financial interest in the outcome of the case, and my memo, which again is quite detailed, and you've had it for some time, doesn't make that case, doesn't say that you have a personal finance. I think the memo indicates that you may, depending on how your legal services have been provided to you and the other plaintiffs in the case, but that's not the gravamen, that's not the point of the memo. The memo says that you have a unique personal interest in the case, which is the authorities of the Attorney General refer to that language. So, third question is,
the case retains the original case filing names all the way through the process.
Yes, you're right. So, Mayor, you were the lead. We refer to you as the lead plaintiff, which means nothing more than you are the name that is the first name on the case. You're the first name in the list of plaintiffs. You are and will always be a plaintiff in that case. That case is now out of district court. You are one of the appellants in the Court of Appeals. There were other appellants in the Court of Appeals, and as I understand the pleadings that have been filed, you are not one of the co-petitioners on.
Thank you. So I am no longer, myself and my wife did not petition the Supreme Court. I can state for a fact I was not involved with attorneys. I was not involved with the plaintiffs. I didn't participate in that process, and I didn't speak with those attorneys. In fact, let me finish. Thank you. I have, before the appellate ruling even came out, I instructed my attorney in writing, and I waived any financial interest, even though I had none, but somebody could try to make the argument that the reimbursement of expenses, it's a de minimis expense, so there's no real benefit, but my wife and I even waived any right to that. We did it in writing. We did it before the appellate court even issued its ruling. So we were out of the case before the appellate court even ruled. So as far as this council trying to declare I have a conflict, you could make the same argument where you try to make that I have a personal interest in the case. Well, they have the same personal interest in trying to declare that I have a conflict so that I can't vote on the payment of their personal legal fees. That cuts two ways. And if you try to say I have a conflict, even though I'm not a petitioner, I'm not involved in the case, but I have a conflict because I have an interest in the case, well, you could make the same argument that I shouldn't vote on a TIF or I shouldn't vote on parking because I have a personal interest in those items too. So that logic to me makes no sense. The bottom line is you told me in writing that it was not clear whether or not I had a conflict. I then went and used my own funds, hired an experienced municipal attorney who was not associated with any of the cases or any prior discussions on this. That law firm gave me a written opinion that says unequivocally, and they looked at Lentz, the case that you're referring to, and they said unequivocally, I do not have a conflict of interest. And that was before I withdrew and my wife withdrew from the case. Therefore, according to what my attorney has told me, that decision rests solely with me, as it does with every other council member, and I do not have a conflict.
May I speak, please?
Go ahead, your floor.
So let's just go back to the video of the December meeting when Mary Hertzberger-Toon spoke before council and urged the plaintiffs to drop the case. And at the end of that meeting, one of the plaintiffs got up and in very strong terms stated that they were not going to drop the case and they are going to be, I think the quote is, and we'll get the video and show the quote, "We are right there with you, Mr. Mayor. We are not going to drop the case." So it's on the video.
That may be on the video, but that has nothing to do with me, right? Because somebody else makes a statement. Clearly, everybody understood that I was a plaintiff long before I ever became elected as the city's mayor. So because somebody makes that statement from the podium doesn't change the fact that the decision as to whether or not I have a conflict rests with me and me alone. My attorney said in no unequivocal terms, I do not have a conflict. I intend to vote on this issue and set a policy along with the other two non-conflicted members of the council.
The policy is set.
So it's your argument that when in 10 April of 2017, when a policy was surprised, brought forward, and then passed, that you voted, both yourself and Councilmember Striegel, voted on a policy to pay the legal fees for the case that was then ongoing. Then explain to me what policy you passed. And let me finish, and then I'll pass the floor. As part of that discussion, as I remember it, I brought up the fact that you were voting on a policy directly related to an ongoing case, right? And that you couldn't vote on that policy, but yet you still voted and passed that policy, and it was supposed to be future cases. And if I'm not mistaken, it was clearly articulated it had nothing to do with the ongoing OML litigation. And I believe the video will show that. Go ahead.
So the vote that you're referring to was requested by you. The motion that I made at the beginning of that meeting was to limit the discussion to future cases. You stated at the beginning of this that this is a new measure as a result of the Supreme Court. That policy is in place right now.
And I would like to have the floor if I could, please.
Yep, go ahead.
So to echo and reinforce, and I did go back and review the tape from that meeting, and I believe it was also Councilmember Crowley who specifically requested that we took the conversation into two pieces. One was to explicitly not discuss the current litigation, which was the appeal to the Minnesota District Appeals Court, and then at least not with us as part of that. And then the second piece of that discussion was specifically to eliminate the uncertainty, the arguing, the debate when you're in the heat of the moment, was to establish a go-forward policy. What would the policy of the council be going forward? And that was clearly, it was voted and approved, as I said earlier tonight. And so as much as you may or may not have a conflict with related to the cases that are already decided and done, You also similarly, whether you do or don't is sort of irrelevant at this point. It's moot because we're talking about defense for a new action. It falls within the policy of the council, and that policy was this action, this appeal to the Supreme Court didn't exist. We had no knowledge or expectation that it would exist, and so it couldn't thereby have been voting for our own legal fees. And therefore, you have no authority to vote about whether to follow a policy or not.
So, Mr. Vos, if I understand Councilman Striegel's argument, he's saying that this is a new issue, it's a new case that didn't exist at that time. Is this the same case that existed back then in a legal sense?
You know, Mayor, putting aside your policy, the answer is no. It's not a new case. Whether it is a new action, new case, I don't know what the words are of the policy, whether it is a new thing under the policy that the policy applies to, that's not for me to judge. That's a question for the City Council. The City Council created and adopted the policy. The question is, what does the policy cover? And that's not for me to answer. That's for you to answer.
Got it. So if for a moment, and I don't agree with this, but let's just say for a moment that this is a new action, wouldn't that then by default mean that we should submit a claim to the League of Minnesota Cities for insurance coverage?
Mayor and Council, if this was a new lawsuit, a new claim, a new cause of action, we would submit it, presumably, if it was a covered kind of action, yeah, we'd submit it for defense, sure.
So but you're saying this is the same case as the district court case and the appellate case, it's just now moved to the Supreme Court level?
Well, Mayor, yes, I am saying that sort of. I would say that I don't think I'm speaking out of school. We have reached out to the League of Cities about whether there might be renewed insurance coverage.
And have they responded?
That they have indicated that they think that is very unlikely.
Okay. So my conclusion from then is they must assume that this is the same case. So if this is the same case, when that April 10th policy was passed by the City Council, and they're now using that policy to say, oh, the city is committed to pay their personal legal fees, they were actually voting on the same case that we're talking about now. And it's quite clear in the conflicts of interest that council members cannot vote on something where they have a direct personal financial interest. And we're talking about the payments of the personal legal fees of the two former council members and the two current council members. Therefore, logic dictates that the policy that was passed April 10th that I thought I clarified in that meeting was going forward, which means some future action, that policy cannot in any way apply to the current action. And that's a legal question that I'd like you to weigh in on, Mr. Vos.
Mayor, I'm not sure I understood what you just said, but I'm going to take a swing at it.
You want me to rephrase it?
Yep.
So when the policy was passed, and if April 10th, I believe is the correct date, that case, the current open meeting law case, Funk versus et al. Versus O'Connor et al., that's moved from the district court to the appellate court and is now in front of the Supreme Court, you've already stated that's the same case. That case was in process April 10th when this policy was voted on. That policy, according to what's been said here tonight, was a forward-looking policy. That to me means it could not be applied to the ongoing case that was in effect at this time, or at that time rather, and continues to be in effect now. The league, based on their saying that any claim would most likely be denied, says it's the same case. So the question I have for you is a legal question. How can conflicted members of the City Council vote and pass a policy for a case that was active at that time, continues today with the Supreme Court being the next step, and have a legal bearing on this council?
Mayor and Council, I think I've said that the scope of the policy that was adopted some months ago is for you to decide. It's not a legal question. It's a question of what was intended by the maker of the motion, the seconder, and the votes in favor of it. I think it was actually a unanimous vote, as I recall. Maybe it's wrong. But regardless, I'm not sure that what you explained there changes it into a legal question. It's still a question of what the policy maybe you're asking the question if the policy applies now to the current
Absolutely.
appeal,
How could-
should we not count the votes of Councilmember Striegel and Crowley, because at the time of the vote months ago, they would have been conflicted? It's a very convoluted argument, I think, but I don't know the answer as I sit here now. I can think about that.
Well, I don't think that this council, my understanding of what was passed that night was some future action, some new case that gets filed that starts at the district court level. The council at that time and the discussions that occurred could not vote on a policy, and I believe I asked a specific question in that session as to whether that was related to the ongoing OML litigation that was already taking place. So I go back to the same basic premise. If the interpretation, and I believe I also asked Ms. Hokanen at that time whether she interpreted that policy to apply to the ongoing OML litigation, and I believe her answer was no. I don't understand, and I don't think it's possible for this council to have voted on passing a policy that would apply to future actions within the case that is already one case. It's not a new case. It's not a forward-looking case because it was already going. Now, if they want to continue to argue that, the council members to my left, they're more than entitled to. As I stated previously, each council member gets to decide for themselves where they have a conflict of interest. This, specifically the Supreme Court piece of this, which is a new element in this whole open meeting law litigation, has not been discussed by this council. Therefore, I believe this council has every right to discuss that because we didn't even know. And in fact, when I asked Mr. Vos and Mr. Reeder to put legal fees, once I found out a petition had been filed, I was asked not to bring that forward until such time as we heard whether or not the Supreme Court was going to take the case. Well, clearly that has occurred, right? I asked as soon as I heard and sent an email to the interim city manager, Doug Reeder, asking him to put legal fees on the agenda. It's not on the agenda. Right? It should have been on the agenda to begin with. I'm moving to put it in, and now I think it's relevant that the two council members who I personally believe are conflicted because they have a direct personal financial interest in not having this discussed by the council or trying to prevent the council from actually talking about this issue. And it says in here, this is from the League of Minnesota Cities, and it's about the conflict of interest, and it says, quote, a public officer who has authority to take part in making any sale, lease, or contract in his or her official capacity shall not voluntarily have a personal financial interest in that sale, lease, or contract, or personally financially benefit from it. It then further goes on to say in a statutory city like Victoria, statutory cities must consider an additional restriction. No member of a statutory city council may have a direct or indirect interest in any contract the council makes. And then finally it says, for example, even though the actual contract is not with a council member, the fact that he or she has an indirect interest could be an issue. Quite frankly, I don't believe that Councilmember Striegel and Crowley should be able to participate in discussions as to whether this item should be added on the agenda. Secondly, I had instructed the interim city manager to add it. Apparently, it got missed and was not added. And I believe that the non-conflicted members of this council have every right to discuss this issue because the Supreme Court has elected to hear the case.
Yeah, as it was before, Mr. Mayor, when that item comes up, assuming it does come up on the agenda, I will remove myself from discussion because I agree with you, I have a conflict. But there will be three of us that should leave the room because you also have a conflict. You have agreed in the past that you have and then magically waved a wand and changed your mind that you no longer have a conflict. You have a litigation incentive. You testified at the trial, and once you are a plaintiff, you are always a plaintiff for the life of the case, and that is a legal opinion. And if you want to violate that, Mr. Attorney, what happens when a conflicted member votes on something in which they're conflicted?
Well, Mayor and Council Member, it depends on the nature of the conflict. The mayor was reading about having a personal financial interest in a contract or other legal instruments, and that's potential criminal liability. There's also, and this is in both the mayor's memo and mine, the lens test, which deals with something broader than just a personal financial interest. That doesn't raise criminal issues, but as my memo indicates, it's my view that a council member that has been found by the council to be conflicted, view supported in this case by the city attorney, that member's vote on that matter should not be counted. That is disputed hotly, I think it'd be fair to say as of tonight, hotly disputed by the mayor and his attorneys, and that's a legitimate legal dispute, and I've proposed, and Doug has brought it forward, that we resolve that. Rather than putting our heads in the sand about that, let's ask somebody for an opinion, a second opinion to my opinion. I mean, that's what the Attorney General would give, would be a second opinion to my opinion about whether the mayor is conflicted, and if he is, what we should do about it. I'm not sure if anyone, Mayor, you in particular, but if anyone's objecting to that, we haven't gotten to that item, but it just seems to me, again, as a matter of prudence, we ought to know the answer to that question before we actually take a vote on the underlying issue, reimbursement of legal fees.
So this goes back to the question I asked you before. This whole concept of the council or you declaring that I have a conflict doesn't reside with you. You haven't been able to cite a statutory basis that allows you to determine for me, and I think the reasoning is quite simple. If, in fact, there was some basis where the majority could declare a minority on a council to be conflicted, think of the abuse that would happen all the time, which is why the decision-making rests with the individual elected official, so do the consequences. I went and got my own opinion. When I first got into office, clearly I was new, hadn't held elected office. I relied originally on you, and then you told me in writing it wasn't clear if I had a conflict. Based on that, I went and got my own opinion from an experienced municipal attorney who said I did not have a conflict. So we are not going to resolve this here. The way that gets resolved is for the defendants, if they feel that I violated that, well, they can go ahead and sue the city for my actions as mayor if they think that I have a conflict. They can't sit here in the council meeting and prevent me from acting as the mayor. I was elected. When I was elected, people knew I was a plaintiff at that time. This is no surprise. The action here is what I see is they're using you and the city resources to try to keep me conflicted because that helps support them with what happened before with you and Hokanen deciding we had a policy because we bought insurance, which is also hotly debated, and a lot of people disagree with that. So I am no longer a petitioner. I'm not a plaintiff in the suit regardless. It's the same action. The policy passed in 10 April cannot apply to the same action that was in place at that time. I fully intend to vote. We have a motion, right? On the table to add this to the agenda, and I'd instructed Doug to add it to the agenda before. It should have been on there, and it's not.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
For the record, my understanding of our agreement and our discussion with the city attorney was that I would not put a bill on to be paid for Supreme Court action I would not pay a bill for Supreme Court action unless I brought it forth to the council. It was not my understanding that you wanted it on tonight.
Correct. But if you look at the email when it was announced and that email was sent that the Supreme Court accepted the petition, I emailed you back and said add legal fees to the agenda for the next council meeting.
And that's what I interpret the agenda item that is on there of how to handle what to do with legal fees for the Supreme Court. That's what I think that item does.
All right. So you're saying the question of the payment of the legal fees related to the Supreme Court, to the case that is now before the Supreme Court, is actually already on the agenda as item. Let me see here.
And it's based on the
6F?
city attorney's recommendation that in order to determine if you have a conflict, we should get an attorney general's opinion of that.
Right, but I'm asking specifically whether the topic of legal fees is part of that. In your opinion, when you added that, was that including my direction to put legal fees on the agenda?
What I put on the agenda was a way to determine that when we do get a bill for a legal action at the Supreme Court, that we would have a way of voting on that, knowing whether or not you had a conflict.
All right. So clearly we're not going to come to an agreement here. I want legal fees. We're going to set a policy tonight. I am not conflicted, and I fully intend to vote. logically see a way where there's any benefit whatsoever for the city to continue to pay these legal fees. I do not have a conflict. But Bob, address that point just briefly, if you will, before we go forward. Explain to me how this in any way, shape, or form benefits the city to pay the legal fees, right, for whatever paperwork goes before the Supreme Court.
Yeah, no, so Mayor, that's a good question. You've alleged in the past, and I think you just did a few minutes ago, that I crafted or was involved in crafting the city's policy or the city manager's policy. That's just wrong. That's not correct. I don't make policy judgments, and I don't have a policy view on that.
I think it's rather humorous that we've wasted 35 minutes of the citizens' time, and the fact that you're making or attempting to make such a strong argument further demonstrates your conflict. Can we move on?
And I find it absolutely astounding that on one hand you'll argue this is the old case, so therefore we're conflicted, but it's not the old case, so you're not conflicted. It's just, I mean, how do you say that with a straight face?
So, very easily. We can, there's a valid motion on the table. I'll let each council member decide for themselves whether they have a conflict and whether they can vote on that motion. At this point,
I would like to ask the attorney, am I conflicted on that? Can I vote on an agenda item?
Yeah, so Mayor and Council, the matter before us right now is an amendment, proposed amendment to the agenda. We've maybe gone a little far afield of that, but that's the item before us, is whether we add this item to the agenda. Mayor, I think you've said it's your view that on that question, the question of adding that item to the agenda, the council members to your left are conflicted. I'm not sure I've heard the argument for that. I'm not sure I've heard a response to that. I hadn't thought about it prior to the meeting because it's not on the proposed agenda, so maybe I don't know if you want to debate that point, but I don't have a view on that. I was not prepared to think about whether they would be conflicted on adding that item to the agenda. I did not anticipate that coming up.
well, that is before us right now, and we need a determination because there's a valid motion on the table to add legal fees related to Thomas O'Connor, James Crowley, Thomas Striegel, Lonnie Bassa, as it relates to legal fees and costs for the ongoing, the case before the Minnesota Supreme Court. It's been there's a valid second, and we were going to add that to the agenda, and now I'm asking for a vote. I believe Councilmember Crowley asked you to say, can he vote on that
I would
amendment?
like to continue to debate it. One more item on here is an agenda item about setting a policy about how things get brought before council, and this is a complete surprise. And you are aware that in the past we've had issues with this when you have continued to bring up complete surprises, and there's little time to prepare. And the attorney just said he's not prepared to offer an opinion. So, in terms of going forward with this, you are presenting everybody on this dais with a disadvantage and not understanding what's going on. And the policy that is in front of us in the agenda item tonight is determine how things can be put on the agenda, and there are very clear statements that there must be time given in advance for people to prepare. And so what you're doing is trying to skirt that policy before it gets put in place to achieve something that is personally a conflict for you, and that is wrong.
So
And Mr. Attorney, if members of this council decide that this is wrong, can we remove ourselves from what would be an illegal vote and remove ourselves from a quorum and walk out?
Mayor and Council, I'm not aware of any legal prohibition against you leaving a meeting while it's in progress.
Does that remove myself from the quorum?
You can defeat a quorum by doing that. I'm certainly not advocating for that, but I'm not aware of a legal prohibition against that. You have responsibilities as elected officials to be at these meetings. If you believe you have to leave for some reason, I'm not going to stand up and say it's illegal to do that.
One final point, Mr. Mayor. If I
Yep, go ahead.
The part on item F, which I submitted, was intended to be a discussion on legal fees. And what should we do with legal fees? Should we seek a declaratory judgment, asking the judge a few questions? One of them was, were things done in 2016? Were those votes, were those proper? The other was, does the city manager have the authority to pay in excess of $20,000? Those questions have never been answered. The other part that I did include on that email was, let's ask a judge to determine what's appropriate for past, present, and future legal expenses. And that part didn't make it on this staff report, but that part clearly was intended to be a legal fee discussion.
So I have I think a solution here. The first off, there is no policy about adding something at the meeting. This is a regularly scheduled meeting. Anybody can add anything at any time. That's exactly what you guys did on 10 April. But
No, that was your agenda item, sir.
it was
We've
not.
already established that. Go
The-
back and look at the record, Mr. Mayor.
The other thing is I put forward the policy to establish rules governing this exact question. But if Doug Reeder agrees to take no action and pay no legal fees, I'm fine with having legal fees added to the very next council meeting where this can be discussed and avoid this whole concept of modifying the agenda now. So Doug, would you agree not to pay any legal fees and then have legal fees specific to the point I just made, which is, and I'll make it again for your reference, to set a policy regarding payment of the personal legal fees of Thomas O'Connor, Thomas Striegel, James Crowley, Ilani Bassa, as it relates to the action currently pending before the Minnesota Supreme Court. So that will be the item on the agenda. Doug, would you agree to add that item and also pay no legal fees or expenses in the meantime related to that?
Mr. Mayor, we have no bills.
Right, but who knows when one will come in. So I'm asking for confirmation that no action will be taken until this can be discussed by the council at the next council meeting.
As I've agreed before, I will not pay any bills until I consult with the council. Not asking for approval at this point anyway.
All right, so let's finish. We still have a valid motion on the table to add it to tonight's meeting. I'm willing to table that as long as, Doug, you say that it'll be on the next council meeting.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know what you're tabling.
I'm going to table the motion to amend tonight's agenda to add legal fees to this agenda, and we're going to put it on the next council meeting. That will give time for the city attorney to consult with the council members to my left.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I think we get the point of that. I think as a technical matter, Robert's Rules, only a matter that is properly before the body can be tabled, and you've just made a motion that's been seconded, but it hasn't been voted on, so it's not a matter that's before the body yet. It hasn't been added to the agenda, but I mean, that we get pretty mired in Robert's Rules. I think the point you're making is you're willing to not proceed with the vote right now as long as Doug agrees to put it on the next agenda.
I think that's what I said.
Remove your motion.
Right, so I move that we table my motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, well, that's only two votes.
So,
You have to vote.
There was three.
The motion should be
So
withdrawn.
now I can vote. Before you told me I
I don't
couldn't.
know what I can vote on, so
You can withdraw the motion.
I withdraw the motion.
Withdraw the motion.
just withdraw the motion.
Just withdraw the motion.
That's fine. I'll withdraw the motion. It's withdrawn.
Can I make one clarification, though, for
Go
what
ahead.
ends up on the agenda? And I think there's no purpose in continuing to include Mayor O'Connor and Lonnie Boss's names to this. They are not, the costs of defense are no different with or without them, and they're no longer covered by any city jurisdiction in any case. So, if, in the same sense that you don't want your name on it, there's no point in having their names on it.
Well, the invoices that have
It's
been
not about paying their legal fees.
the invoices that have been sent to the city include their names on it, just like it includes your name.
Point of
So
order,
all
can
four
we
of
go
them.
forward with the agenda, please?
Yep. That item has been withdrawn. Motion.
Item 6F will stay on the agenda.
Correct. Motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion, we approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second
Absolutely,
motion.
I will second that.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, the agenda is now adopted. Open forum. I have no slips.
40 minutes.
Please refrain.
Good evening, Council. My name is Pete Bren.
Please, with the mic, please. Thanks.
I live at 7914 Narcissus Court. I actually got two things I want to talk to you fellows about tonight. First, are you aware that a city clerk has the ability to determine how your sewer is charged, the amount that you're charged? I've lived here for 26 years, and when I called up and tried to figure out why I consumed 15,000 gallons of water, but was charged for 21,000 gallons of sewage. It's just not possible. So when I inquired and talked with the accounts technician in my time, she was a clerk, she got somewhat upset when I questioned her authority, because when I asked her about it, I said, how can this be? It's like, well, we have seasonal this, and I said, well, how, wouldn't it be nice if we had the ability to actually determine how we got charged? She says, well, what would you like? Do any of you guys know does any of you guys have any idea that you can actually determine how they charge you for your sewer and water? I ended up talking with Kelly Grinnell and asked, it's like, does this clerk have the ability to decide how our sewer is charged? There's two ways they do it. A new resident, because they don't have any history, typically pays, I believe she's got some formula. But the city clerk has the ability to identify how we get charged, but we don't have a choice. It would be nice to know why we don't have one. And I think that's something that should be brought up and at least allow people to determine how their sewer gets done. Do you guys even know any of this?
No, hang on a second. Doug, do we have something like that that's available to the public?
Mr. Mayor, I'm not knowledgeable.
You're brand new, yeah. Don't worry about it.
Kelly, you want to address that, or you want to?
I can address it if you'd like me to now.
Please. Just briefly.
Yeah, this is new information to me, so I'd like to.
Yeah, nobody knows
better
about it.
also.
So for sewer charges, we have a policy of charging an average of winter quarter usage. So each year we determine what the winter quarter usage is for water and base sewer charges on that. The purpose of that is that residents would not get charged for irrigating in the summer months, because if we based sewer charges on actual usage, they'd have a much higher sewer bill in the summer months. So every year we calculate a new sewer average, and it's based on the winter quarter use of the prior year.
Okay, so let me fill in what I think are a couple of gaps, but I understand. The winter quarter usage is generally, for average household, is the lowest use quarter, correct?
Correct.
And in the summer, in my
I
understanding.
understand all this. What I'm getting at is, why doesn't anybody know how this is going on? And what's the average based off of? Each individual user or citywide?
Each individual user.
I beg to differ based off on going back and looking at this, because that's not the case. I haven't had my irrigation on for 6 years. I'm still getting charged like it's being done that way, because my water usage doesn't change any month. Maybe 1,000 gallons here or there. So I don't believe that's true. But really, my question is why none of us have the ability to make that decision on our own. Why is that being made by a clerk technician? That's what I want to find out.
Well, I'd like to understand more too, and I think the process to understand that would be to bring it to Mr. Reeder and let's investigate it. I'd like to find out.
Wonderful.
Be happy to meet with you.
This is something you guys need to solve, so the residents here can make, they need to be able to determine how they want it done. It's that simple. I don't need to have a debate about it or anything. It just needs to be brought up to them, and they need to have the choice. It shouldn't be determined by a city clerk.
So let's,
Happy to meet with you.
since this is the open forum, I think we get the point.
Yep.
I don't want to continue to discuss this and get on.
I agree.
Doug, would you please take this as an action item and get back to the gentleman? And at the same time, since it's been brought up, if you have some sort of an overview, can you post it to the city website so anybody else could get?
Exactly. I'll meet with them, make sure I understand what information you want out there, and we'll certainly put it out.
Just let the folks know they got a choice on how they're getting charged for their sewer.
Perfect.
It's that simple.
Thank you.
Second one is
go ahead.
5 gentlemen that are sitting in the council right now. I just sat there for 45 minutes listening to you guys bicker. You got to stop it. Here's the thing. It's your legal fees that have been bringing all this up. Your twos. Why don't you go back to your attorney? It looks to me like, based on your attorney didn't do a very good job, because you were found in violation 11 times. You were found in violation 10. Why don't you go get your money back? He should have represented you better. I mean, that'd solve a lot of this. Go back and it's like, you're charging me all this, and this is all you could do? And you're still looking at the rest of us to pay for your legal fees. So go back to the guy that represented you and go, wow, nice job. And you still want to get paid? So, and then the rest of you guys on this council, as long as the 5 of you are sitting behind here, nothing's ever going to get solved. All 5 of you need to go home and think about this tonight. If you went home and actually thought about it, all 5 of you can agree on one thing. You should all resign and let this whole thing just pass by so the rest of this town can move forward. You need to quit this or go find something else to do because you're not doing your jobs. Thank you, guys.
Okay, anybody else? All right, consent agenda. Doug, any changes? Council, any changes?
No.
Public, anything on the consent agenda? Okay, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion, we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Consent agenda is approved. Donations. Can we get that up on the screen?
Uh-oh. That might be me, Mayor, so we'll hope for the best here. Yeah.
I move we approve the resolution accepting a donation from the Lions Foundation of Victoria. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That passes unanimously. New business. Doug, election absentee information.
Mr. Mayor, there's discussion among the city clerks in the county and with the county of how we should handle absentee voting for people who want to vote in person. Historically, in this county, you have gone to the county to vote in person for the absentee ballots, either in Chanhassen or in Chaska. The county is suggesting that maybe the city should take over that function so that people would actually come to each individual city. And they're saying that because apparently it's more and more people as we change the way people want to vote, and it's now legal to vote absentee without an excuse. So there may be more and more people that are now going to vote absentee. The question is, do we want to have the people come to City Hall here to vote absentee or go to Chaska or Chanhassen at their activity center? We're not at the point where we need to vote on that. We're sort of looking at the council's reaction on that, and we would get back to the county with information on what this city is thinking we should do.
Council comments?
Is it going to cost the city money to do this? Will we have to hire someone?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, no, we would not probably hire anybody, but it would take more staff time. We might have some more temporary help during the election. As you see in the agenda item here, there were 1,100 absentee ballots in the last election. That was presidential. It took 5 minutes in person, and then if they voted by mail, it's a 10-minute thing. So we're talking
Can we get the
5 or
staff
10 minutes of people's time here at city staff to handle that.
Can we get the staff report put up, please?
Can we?
Going to be tough.
Are you working the computers too tonight?
I'm clicking buttons here, yeah, I'm not sure I'm doing it right.
Couple questions. Is the length of time that we're required to make this available to people, is that regulated somehow by state staff?
The absentee voting time? Correct. The law says we start accepting absentee ballots at a certain time and stop, and there's some extra hours on the last Saturday before the election for people to vote. But it's a minimal, it's about a month.
About a month. Oh.
And specific hours each day, business
Right.
during that month.
With some Saturday required on the last weekend.
Thank you.
So what are you looking for tonight?
Simply guidance, would your preference be to keep the voting the way it's always been, to have the county handle it? Or would you want the people to come here? My thought is as long as it's working and Chaska and Chanhassen facilities are so close, that I don't see a real reason that it's that much of an advantage for the people to be able to come here.
I would tend to accept that recommendation with the thought process being that it's a whole lot easier to scale up something that already exists a little bit than it is to start fresh and do something and all of the arrangements and training, et cetera, that needs to multiply it into multiple locations.
I think we should leave it as a county responsibility at this time.
I agree.
I would agree that we should, but I think we're missing the point. I think the county is asking us to discuss this because they don't want to be burdened with the full share of the cost. So they want us to either participate in the cost or take it on ourselves.
Mr. Mayor, that's possible, but I don't think we've been formally asked that question. They're simply raising the question at this point. I think there's been some discussion among the clerks that possibly we could help them out with some staffing when they had that problem, but I don't know why the city would help the county personally. I think they have an obligation to run that, and I think they can afford it.
I didn't miss the point.
Wasn't that the point, though?
They asked us what we think.
Oh, okay.
So it sounds like it's unanimous. I don't think anybody on the council wants to start that process here. Chain of custody, there's all sorts of other questions duplicating the effort already provided by the county. So unless the council objects, let's let them know that we would prefer the county continue to handle this.
Mayor, I agree. I mean, if it was Hennepin County, you had to drive all the way down to Minneapolis. I think that's a different question. But here, the proximity of where they can vote, I think, is reasonable.
All right. I think that, do you need a vote on that?
No.
All right. Next item, the official newspaper.
Mr. Mayor, the council had asked us to look at whether, you previously approved the Chanhassen Villager as your official newspaper, which you have before. Council asked, could we use Waconia or could we use Minneapolis newspaper? And what we're telling you here tonight is you could not use Waconia because you don't have enough subscribers. You have to have at least 400 people that subscribe to that newspaper in Victoria in order to use it as your city newspaper. So your choice is then using Minneapolis Tribune, Star Tribune, or the Chanhassen paper. And if you see the numbers here, the Chanhassen Villager is roughly half the cost of the Minneapolis paper. So it'd be staff recommendation that you continue what you've already approved to use the Chanhassen newspaper.
Council, does anybody want to change or stay where we are?
Well, I'll just comment on this because I was the one who kind of pushed this issue forward, and it was a direct result of clearly biased and in one case dishonest reporting and as acknowledged by a representative of the newspaper. So my goal was to try and find some more neutral ground. So yeah, by doing the math here, we would spend about $1,900 of additional city money, but that wouldn't stop the dishonest, biased reporting. So I guess I don't see a lot of value in changing what we're doing. But other than, at least we wouldn't be funding them. But that's probably not enough reasons. So I accept from my perspective, I accept to stay the course with the current paper.
Council, other comments? Then it sounds like we'll stay with the Chanhassen Villager as the official newspaper. Next item, policy for council agendas. We touched on this briefly earlier. Doug?
Mr. Mayor, what I've given you is sort of a multiple choice question. I've given you various questions on this issue and would suggest that we could come up with a policy if you could, for example, in the first question, who can place an item on the council agenda? I've listed the city manager, the mayor, any council member, or any two council members. I think in that area, I think the city manager and the mayor should be able to. The question in my mind, would it be any other council member or any two council members? That's the multiple choice that I see in that one. I don't know if you want to take these separately or all at one time, and at some point we ought to have a motion and we'll come back with a policy.
I wonder if it wouldn't be more efficient that each council member look at what you proposed for the 5 items, circle the ones they want, put our names on them, send them to you and see if there's a consensus out of that, and then actually draft a policy from that. Either that or if the council wishes, we can discuss item by item. I'm trying to figure out what the easiest and most efficient way to get through this is. Council, any thoughts on how you want to do this?
I kind of like the mayor's position there. Let's take a look at it. Let's send this in privately. Everybody vote for whichever ones, or sometimes one of the above, all of the above, or two of the above. So,
I agree with what you proposed. I thought we wrote this policy about a year and a half ago.
There's no policy in the policy book that Lori Hokanen gave me.
Any recollection?
No, I don't have it. I guess I'm not. That's fine. We can circle things and send them in. But I guess as a kind of a footnote to this, it seems like if there's an issue that this, I always start with what's the problem we're trying to solve, right? And if I take that approach, the problem is ensuring that everybody has information and time to form an opinion, be educated, study the issue, and form an opinion. And so to me, that's not really about who puts something on the agenda, but what kind of time frame. And so for me, I would rather, we've always been a very collegial body that, if there's something that seems of interest to the body, we put it on. And it didn't necessarily need to be, boundaries around who got to decide. But I do think it is a question that's been raised fairly over the past 13 months about timing, preparedness, accompanying materials, et cetera. So for me, that would be the thing really, is to say when, if you want to put something on, what's the time frame? What does it need to have to be a legitimate agenda item? And, the deficiencies piece and all that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think these questions, that's exactly why I asked Doug to put something together for the council to consider. And I think if we all give our choices or our preferences to Doug, he can then maybe draft a policy that we could then redline. Because I think formally documenting that whole process eliminates a lot of these side discussions and these arguments, because we'll all know what the rules are and we'll all follow those same rules. There's no more debate or argument.
I think we're making this harder than it actually needs to be. And I just looked through this, and going forward in the past, it was done out of courtesy. You need to make sure that the information is available and to the city manager in time to be placed on the agenda, so that everybody has time to review and consider. And so if you go down and look at what we've done in the past and what we're trying to avoid, and keep people from not being able to prepare, it's pretty straightforward. It's C, it's C, it's B, it's B, and it's B. It's what we've done in the past, and that's what we're trying to do going forward. And I'd make a motion to do those if everybody's agreeable with it, and let's just get it done and move on.
I want to send, I don't agree with all of those items. I want to send them in to Doug. It sounds like Councilmember Gregory's in agreement. Councilmember Vogt said he's in agreement. Councilmember Striegel, what's your preference?
That's fine.
Sure. That's
all right. So let's do that. So we'll give those to Doug. That closes out item C. Amending, item D, amending the December 28th meeting minutes. Doug?
Mr. Mayor, council member requested that we look at whether the minutes should be amended to include some comments that you made. And so the motion would be to amend the minutes or not?
Actually, I think it was Councilmember Crowley and Councilmember Striegel. It was a result of
Here at the meeting, last meeting.
not being, no, it was a result of the not having an audio or video from the 1228 meeting.
So is there any objection?
So we didn't have an audio or video from 1228, is that what you're saying?
No, apparently there was a technical glitch.
That was the meeting that the audio failed.
So
Right.
how do we have a record of what was said?
Oh, I said that. I'm
Okay.
not going to argue with that. I'm fine with that. I move we amend according to amend the meeting minutes to reflect the comment I made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Item D is done. E, Lawyers Professional Responsibility Board. Doug, is this you or Mr. Vos?
I think this is me. This was also requested by council to be on, and what we received was a report from the Office of Lawyers Professional Responsibility telling us that they had received a complaint jointly submitted by Mayor Funk and Councilmember Gregory, and it gives the opinion of that office that they're not going to review any further the request that was submitted. So there's no action needed on this. It was just requested to be on the agenda for discussion, as I understand it.
Council, comments?
I'm just concerned that more of the same is continuing, and it has, it's not the appearance. If anybody has a difference of opinion, it's how can we get them fired or how we can get them removed from council, and at some point it's got to stop, so.
Any other comments? Councilmember Gregor?
Well, I was just going to wait to see how this was going to go, and depending on how much I needed to weigh in or not. But to me, in my opinion, this should have just been handled in the city attorney report. But if the discussion's going to die off, I'll let it die off.
Any other comments?
I hope this is I hope this is the last time we discuss this.
I can, from my perspective, it's over and done. They ruled, and that's as far as we can take it, and it's over.
All right, final comments? Okay, next item. F, Attorney General's opinion. Doug?
Mr. Mayor, this item concerns the Supreme Court, which has now granted the petition to hear the appeal to the appeals court. And the questions that you've talked about at length tonight already are how we would go about paying any future attorney fees which resulted from the Supreme Court. And the city attorney had suggested when he and I talked that we should take this to the Attorney General to see if the mayor has a conflict on voting for those fees or not, with the idea that once we solve that, then we could bring a fee to the council knowing who was permitted to vote and who would not be permitted to vote. So that's where this item came from. And then there were some other motions suggested by the council that rather than go to the Attorney General, that we would file a motion for declaratory judgment on several different issues. So that's the three choices that are on this agenda item.
Council, who wants to start the discussion?
I think the first proposed motion is the correct one. The second option would take a lot of time and probably cost quite a bit of money, probably close to $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. It'd probably take months. Whereas, as I understand it, an Attorney General's opinion, we could get it within a month.
Mr. Mayor, yes, that is what we are estimating, that we could, city attorney could file the request in a couple of days, and we would expect that we could get an answer within a month.
And Mayor,
Go ahead.
probably doesn't need to be repeated. We've had a fair amount of discussion about it earlier in the meeting, but I guess my view, I've made the recommendation that we take that step. And again, to reiterate, it's simply because it's the city council's stated position. You voted on the issue. I've issued an opinion indicating that you, Mayor, have a conflict with respect to reimbursement of legal fees. You don't agree with that, and you have a legal opinion that supports the view that you're not conflicted. That tees up the question of, well, what happens then? What happens when a city council believes one of its members is conflicted and the city attorney agrees? Do you count that member's vote? What else do you do about it? I think the most efficient way to really get a second opinion about your lawyer's opinion and mine, both opinions, would be to get an Attorney General's opinion. That statutorily is exactly what the Attorney General is authorized to do. The Attorney General is statutorily authorized to give guidance to local government attorneys regarding these kinds of issues. Mayor, you've, I think, really emphasized one of the things that I think would have to be asked, one of the two things. The first is, do you have a conflict or not? The second is, if you do, what is the consequence of that? You've made the point. You've asked me, what is the statutory authority for the idea that if a member is conflicted, his or her vote should not be counted?
No, I asked, what's the statutory authority that allows the council to declare I have a conflict or you to declare I have a conflict?
Fair enough. So that's my suggestion. And to be clear about it, and because we've had some fairly recent history on seeking Attorney General's opinions, let me say now what I think you all realize is my view, and that is the way we did it the last time. We asked a series of questions about the city manager's authority to pay reimbursement and related issues. You directed me in that process originally to work with the plaintiff's attorney. He then removed himself or recused himself or was not going to participate, and so I ended up working with residents in the plaintiff's group. I will just tell you that is not the way it's done. That's not statutorily contemplated, and it was obviously difficult. There was a disagreement about whether Lori and I did enough work with the residents to get their views and their input into the request. I'm not suggesting anything like that, but I'm sure Mayor and other council members that may agree with the mayor's view that may cause concern. My intention would be, if you follow my recommendation, to literally submit my written opinion and Mayor, your written opinion, and say very little else other than asking the Attorney General to clarify who's right in those opinions, and then to the extent we need to ask sort of related questions of, and if the mayor is found to be conflicted, what is the consequence? I would do that, but really it would be, please give us a second opinion about the opinions that have already been rendered on the mayor's conflict. That, as Doug has already said, as the interim manager has already said, is clearly more financially efficient. I think it's also more time efficient than, I guess the other alternatives would be a lawsuit, a declaratory judgment or another lawsuit to resolve that issue, or I suppose we could go out and try and find some independent, qualified, not interested attorney to give his or her opinion. I'm not sure that's going to give a lot of confidence, though, just finding another private attorney to give an opinion on the same subject. So that's the reason for the recommendation, and I don't think I need to make the point again about why I'm recommending that. I think we're headed for, as soon as the next meeting, an issue of whether the mayor should be voting on this matter, and I'd like to resolve that.
So 2 points. An opinion from the Attorney General is not the same as a finder of fact, which only a court can do, correct?
Mayor and council, yeah, the Attorney General's opinions are not the same thing as a court's opinion. I'm not sure the finder of fact part in your question is the point, but you're right, they're not the same thing.
So we don't know what the Attorney General would say one way or the other, but it doesn't change us. It doesn't move us forward in any way. It's just another opinion.
Well, Mayor and council, I guess I'd take issue with that. No, cities all over the state follow the advice of the Attorney General. The Attorney General is certainly first among equals when it comes to giving guidance on local government law, and it's routine, common for city attorneys and city councils to follow that.
So I wouldn't argue with that. I do have concerns about, if you go back to when we asked the opinion before, and we went through that whole process with the Attorney General, how you framed the question, I think, influenced the letter we got back from the Attorney General. Specifically, what I'm referring to is you never asked whether the city should pay the fees. You just asked, how can the city pay the fees? I'm concerned the same kind of how you couch this for the Attorney General does not represent necessarily my point of view. There's clearly a lot of disagreements between the two of us. I don't believe I get a fair shake from your opinions, and I think there's numerous instances of that. So how am I supposed to be reassured that my position and all of the facts related to that, especially when you're having conversations with the Attorney General's office, how I'm adequately represented through that process, especially given the fact that after all of the things that have happened, I had to hire my own attorney. I feel that this would be an unfair advantage, and clearly the other members of the council have a vested interest in having me declared with a conflict, because that perpetuates the taxpayers of Victoria paying probably another $100,000 to pay their legal fees if you can conflict me out and therefore the council can't set a policy specifically to those payments. So how could you reassure me that I would get a fair shake?
Well, so Mayor, I'm not sure it's going to be satisfactory to you, the answer, but, I mean, part of your question, I disagree with the premise of your question. You were suggesting that I had conversations with the Attorney General, or that I'm submitting information to the Attorney General that isn't known to the world. That's just not right. My request to the Attorney General was provided to you, my client, the City Council, when it was submitted, and I had no conversations with the Attorney General other than in the form of those letters. The plaintiffs group did that. They sent in letters that I didn't know about, but I didn't do that. And so,
Did you speak to the AG's office?
yeah, I let them know that a letter would be coming.
Okay, did you have further conversations with them?
I had a follow-up call saying that the letter that I got belatedly, there was going to be a response to it. But did I talk about the merits of the issue or the substance? No, I did not.
So I think the only way to do this fairly and equitably, because I'm sitting here trying to defend the taxpayers that are left paying all of these bills, I believe I need to be independently represented with anything that goes forward. So you can submit your memo, and I believe the process in that memo that was written for me that I paid for out of my own pocket was designed to answer the question. But I think a separate letter or a different letter would need to be drafted in order to go to the Attorney General requesting the comparison between your points and what was done for me. So my concern here is that my position gets fairly represented in front of the AG. And if the council can assure me or is willing to pay the minimal cost to have my attorney draft a letter that he agrees with you, and we can submit as two exhibits the original letters, then I'd be fine with doing that, so that at least I know that I'm fairly represented in front of the AG's office. So that's a question really for the council.
So you're asking us to pay
Couple of concerns. Mayor, could I have the floor?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. One thing I'd be interested in knowing, if we sent it to the Attorney General, does this city council have the authority to take away the vote of another member? I don't know if there's precedent out there or not for that. This is challenging. If we do go to the Attorney General and they do declare that, it is their opinion that the mayor is conflicted, we're no closer to a decision on legal fees than we have been for all of 2017. We're back to square one where we have just two people that are able to discuss this issue. And so rather than take a motion to go to the Attorney General just to get back to square one, which may or may not happen, what about thoughts or discussions about moving this thing forward, talking about a declaratory judgment? I was hoping to get a little more answers on some mechanisms on how that would work. But in speaking with a close acquaintance who does have a law office in Chan, he's done a number of them, and first question I asked him was, well, what would this cost? He said, somebody comes to me with that answer, first thing I tell them it's going to cost at least $3,000. Okay, that's not too bad. So ours is much more complicated than that. So, I mean, if we put some kind of a limit, we set a limit of $15,000, and both sides get to split that up and argue a case. How would that happen? And put some of these questions forward. Were things done properly in 2016? Does the city manager have the authority to pay in excess of $20,000? Regardless of how those questions are answered, what should we do with legal fees going forward? Can we ask a judge to answer those questions? To take it out of the hands of the interim city manager, which is a lot of pressure on Mr. Reeder, and it also hinders our chances of getting a good permanent city manager. So let's get this. Let's take some steps to resolve this.
Mr. Mayor, may I have the floor?
Go ahead.
I am not in favor of asking the city attorney to file yet another lawsuit against somebody in our town. I support option one.
Which, if the result is that somehow we are able to take away the vote of the mayor, that gets us back to square one. In effect, maintaining the status quo, which is to pay the legal fees for the defendants.
And I believe one of the questions Councilmember Gregory asked is there some statutory requirement or case law that you can cite where specifically the council has the ability, or any public body has the ability to invalidate a vote of one of their elected members?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, again, all addressed in my memo. Is there statutory authority? You used that phrase a number of times, Mayor. No, there's no statutory authority. Is there legal authority? Yes, it's set out in my memo. So, but you don't accept that view. I understand that. But yes, there is legal.
So what's the basis of the legal authority? Because I'm clearly not finding
I
it.
don't have my memo in front of me. I'm happy to.
Okay, well, is it case law, or is it a law passed by the legislature?
It's case law and Attorney General's opinions.
Okay, could you send those to me, please?
Sure.
Thank you. So let's get back to the AG opinion. Councilmember Crowley wants to do item 1. What about my concerns about my position being fairly represented in front of the AG? Council comments on that? So apparently,
I think the cover letter coming from our attorney should be antiseptic and short. In other words, it's a cover letter. You're sending 2 opinions to the Attorney General for a ruling, and you reference the attorney's opinion from the mayor, and you have your own document that you prepared, and avoid all unnecessary verbiage that could be construed as having bias.
And could it be sent out to council, individual council, to receive feedback before it gets sent in?
Essentially, what you're doing is you're saying that our attorney is committing malpractice, and if you don't like how he's doing this, I mean, that's what you're saying.
I didn't say that.
That's what you're inferring. And what I'm suggesting is that he is a professional. He is governed by the Minnesota Professional Responsibilities Board. That he has proposed this. He has been right in every opinion that he's offered. Let him do his job.
Yeah, the opinion that was written for me was not designed to go to the AG, and I do have what I think are valid concerns as far as the city attorney representing my point of view. I think the city attorney also has concerns that if it turns out that opinion were to come back and I would be able to vote, I believe that can put questions into play that he doesn't want, namely the ability of an unconflicted council of 3 people deciding to take a look at the 2016 and 2017 legal fee payments, and that potentially opens up a can of worms for both Mr. Vos and Kennedy and Graven. So I do believe it's in the city attorney's best interest to try to get me declared conflicted. And I don't mind going to the Attorney General, but I want to make sure that I'm fairly represented with somebody that's fighting for my point of view, because I'm not convinced that the city attorney is completely neutral in this.
So, Mayor, I have to respond to that. The idea that I'm opposed to you collectively or you individually challenging my legal advice to the City Council in 2016 is wrong. In fact, that was the purpose of the last Attorney General opinion request. So I guess you can criticize the way the question was posed, but there were opposing questions submitted by folks that I think are aligned with you, at least on those issues. And I was not at all opposed. In fact, I think I may have recommended that. So I'm not opposed to, and I don't see any liability for me or for Kennedy and Graven, even if you were to find that those opinions were mistaken. I'm not. You're not correct that I'm concerned about that. If the council wants to go and take another look at those, that's fine. That's
all right. Well, it seems that the majority on the council is going to want to do number 1, submitting both what I got from my attorney along with what Bob had written before, And so at this point, I need a motion, unless there's further discussion. Council, further discussion?
I move we go forward with option one.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed signify by saying nay. Nay. All right, motion to go forward with number one passes on a 3-2 vote. Myself and Councilmember Gregory opposed it. All right, next item, unfinished business, county yard waste site. Doug?
Mr. Mayor, I was asked to put this back on the agenda, and it's sort of been a moving issue today. I have prepared a resolution, which, Kelly, I don't know if you can put that up, but we also received today a letter from an email from Greg Bowe of the county suggesting that there are, what he's taking to the county board on the 20th is 4 different sites that he thinks should be considered for the waste site. One is the Arboretum on 82nd Street. The second one is, I don't know if you have this, Kelly, short, I think we do. The second is the county public works property at 11360 US 12 in Cologne. The third one is the Gedney property in Chaska, and the fourth one is the Auburn Lake property on Victoria Drive, which is the one that staff had suggested in Victoria. So I don't know how you want to handle this, Mr. Mayor. I assume there's no question that the county board is going to take this issue up on the 20th of February. They have sent a notification out to the city, which we received today, and I think the residents in that area also received information that that hearing would be 5:30 on February 20th before the county board to determine what to do. My original resolution that I drafted here indicated that we're requesting them to table that discussion on the basis that we'd like to have them look at some of these other sites. One of the county commissioners will be missing from that meeting, and we think that they should look at this issue some more. So what we need is direction from the council of what you want to do as far as communication with the county board on this issue.
Let me start the discussion. I met just recently with Doug at the community leaders over in Chanhassen. This topic came up. There were a number of commissioners there. We discussed it. This property, the number 4 on the list, the Auburn Lake property near Victoria, had come up. At that time, I indicated to the commissioners, I thought that may be interesting. Since then, I've thought about it. And this property, or this piece of land, is actually back behind the Dairy Queen north on County Road 11. The more I thought about it after that meeting, the more I began to dislike it, not only because it's close to the Moravian Church, but we already have a lot of traffic there by the Dairy Queen, and that's a bad intersection, and we don't want a bunch of trailers going through. So although I indicated at that time I may support that, since then, after thinking about it, I wouldn't. I'd like to get the council's thoughts. I would like to suggest that the county look at items 2, 3, or 5, and that the council here does not support options 1 or 4. And with that, let me turn it over to the other council members who would like to go next.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead. I think you were first.
First of all, I agree with eliminating the Auburn Lake property as a consideration. We are concerned about the intersection of Highway 5 and County Road 11 today. Putting hundreds of cars through that intersection makes that intersection more dangerous. I don't think it's a prudent thing to do. Simple as that.
Next, Councilmember Striegel.
Thank you. This is there's so much. This is troubling on a number of levels, because it appears that there is just an awful lot of additional information that most of us never saw, and So in, I believe, November of 2016, there was an original meeting. There was a kind of a neighborhood meeting, and it was held at the Arboretum, and the purpose was to discuss this, potential site at the Arboretum. And I think it was fairly, I don't know about unanimous, but it was pretty consistent amongst the residents who attended that meeting that this was not in their best interest, not in they were opposed to it strongly. And I think they all left that meeting with the strong impression that it was pretty much off the table, that they were going to go find a new site. And so I started getting phone calls and emails when a year later, last November, it showed up as kind of an, oh, by the way, we're doing this and we're going to do it this coming spring. And, again, they left the meeting with the idea that they had showed up, participated, expressed their opinion, and were given the impression that that site was off the table. So, I did a little more digging, and with a lot of help from some residents, there's a lot of information here that is in the packet. So I encourage everyone to maybe go through it. I won't go through all of it, but there's a couple of things that I think are maybe the more prescient points. One is, the Arboretum, who has always been a good neighbor and an asset to the community. And I'm afraid that if this moves forward with this site, it's going to reflect pretty poorly on them and in likelihood change, at least for a number of our residents, the opinion of whether they truly are a good neighbor. And I don't think we want that to happen. So I think we want to very strongly send the message and the encouragement to find a new site. They made the statement that they don't want to burn their waste. They can't afford to haul it away, and they can't afford to buy the equipment and handle it on site. And so this was their answer. And while they are offering free use of a piece of their land that they're not using, they're essentially getting free disposal at the cost of everyone else in Carver County. And this site in 2017 at PV Road generated 11,000 visits for yard and brush waste disposal specifically, and 50% of those were Chanhassen. And as I understand it, virtually every other municipality within Carver County offers some opportunity, whether it's City Public Works or whatever, to deposit yard waste and brush. So, with the exception of Chanhassen, so that shouldn't be a surprise, the percentage that they use it. And then 25% was Chaska. So kind of with that thought in mind, the second site there, or the third one, I guess, the Gedney property, which is right on the border of Chanhassen and Chaska, seems to be far more appropriate in a couple of points. One being it is closest to 75% of the users. Second is it's in a commercial area and has regular commercial traffic. Third, it has good access roads that are fully improved coming from the east and the west and the north, and the south is the river, so it's not relevant. Victoria as a whole was about 5% of the visits to that site for yard waste and brush disposal. So to me, the value to Victoria is very, very low, and the cost to Victoria is high. And so I can't support that in any respect. They cite safety. There was a presentation made to the Chaska City Council, which we didn't get that same presentation, but had we, citing safety was one of the issues for removing it from PV Road, and yet our concerns about safety at that intersection of 82nd Street and Bavaria seem to be kind of waved off with it's such a small percentage of the total traffic on that road that it really doesn't matter. And I guess I beg to differ. And I could point to already it's a challenging intersection. It's a dirt road on the side where they want to do this. And I know that many of you already know this information, and so I'm saying it as much for the people who might be watching from home to make sure that the information gets spread more widely. But at the hours that this site is proposed to operate, which is 11 per week for about a 6-month period. And again, 11,000 visits in that time. And in the core of those operating hours, a few hundred of the least experienced drivers in our community are going to be getting out of Holy Family High School and going through that intersection and competing with that additional traffic. And I think, that is a safety concern that anybody who's around there at that time certainly sees. It's plainly obvious. And so also, just lastly, and this is a much smaller issue, is the idea of not having a site at all is one that deserves some discussion as well, and let the municipalities take care of their own. Now, I'm always in favor of where you can combine services and be more cost effective, that makes really good sense. And I think, one of the goals of having this yard waste, it's organic material, so it seems fairly inane in a lot of ways, but it's not when the argument is that it ends up in the landfill, the landfills up very quickly, and that's not good for anybody. So I can support the idea of having something, but whether it has to be a countywide site and expecting people to drive that far to do it maybe isn't terribly realistic. And part of the argument is if it's not in the, quote, center of population, then people will just go dump things randomly wherever. But if 5,179 of those visits, those 11,000 visits came from Chanhassen, it feels like coming around to the far side of the Arboretum to dump it is a little bit off their beaten path, and I'm not sure it's going to end up having somewhat the same effect. So I think I just need people to know this and try to put our best support behind a site that makes sense. I mean, in general, I'll speak not for the council but for myself that this is an important asset, but this isn't the right place. And again, this site near the Gedney property in Chanhassen and Chaska to me is one that I would like to ask this council to make a motion or a resolution of support for that site.
To that point, thank you. To that point, Doug has drafted a letter putting support for Victoria behind the Gedney property. I'd like to see, if the council agrees, and we haven't heard from all the council members yet, but if the council members agree, we use this letter as the preference. And then if that site, for whatever reason, isn't available, I'd like to have some sort of language added in where option 2, the county public works property or the county Halts brush service, which is item 5 on the list, that those sites be alternatives after the Gedney property, but the primary focus and primary choice would be the Gedney property in Chaska, assuming I'm pronouncing that right. But before we go there, Councilmember Crowley, Councilmember Gregory, each of you haven't had a chance yet. Who would like to speak next?
I'll go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
I am not in favor of having this facility in Victoria, and for all of the reasons that Councilmember Striegel mentioned. I look at the proposal here, and where should it go? In my mind, it doesn't belong in the city limits of any of the 3 cities. My focus is on Victoria. I don't believe it belongs in Victoria. I am concerned and upset that the county government officials are coming to Victoria saying we should put it here. And so for me to say we should put it at the Gedney facility in Chaska, I think I would offend them because I don't live in Chaska. And so I really look back that I think the county officials need to work in concert with the cities and put it in a location that's agreeable to all of them. And ideally, to get an agreement, it's probably outside of the city limits of all of them. And so, in terms of a letter from Doug, I find it difficult to say I want it at the Gedney facility. Yeah, I think it'd be a great facility. Honestly, I don't know about it. I don't know if the citizens of Chaska want that. They should have a voice in that. I just don't want it in Victoria.
How about if we add language to the letter that said, assuming the councils of Chaska and Chanhassen would agree to that location, we would support that, instead of saying put it there. Say if they would agree.
I would support that.
I would accept that change or support that change.
Councilmember Gregory?
Yeah, thank you. I'd certainly support that language as well. I agree with pretty much everything Councilmember Striegel had to say regarding the Victoria site. With that said, I certainly could support the Public Works site as well. I think that would be a long-term permanent site. It might be a little bit far for some residents, but I would much prefer that site as opposed to no site at all.
And just for clarification, that's the county public works property?
County Public Works,
Okay,
where they already
thank you.
own the land. I don't think it would cost that much for them to put a site there, and I'd much prefer to have at least some county facility as opposed to none at all.
Mr. Mayor,
go ahead.
further comment. 75% of this brush is coming from the east of us. And it'd be ridiculous to have to haul it to Cologne. So I think the Gedney site is a very appropriate site, and we should,
For cost reasons?
for cost reasons, if I was in Chaska or Chanhassen, I would love to drive over to that site instead of driving to Cologne. And as far as the local Victoria site, I think the fact that 82nd Street is not improved is the biggest factor. You can't put that kind of traffic on that road unless it's improved. And then if it was improved, a lot of the traffic could be coming down 82nd Street from the east. The people from Chaska and Chanhassen would be coming in that way, but that's not the case. And I think the other thing we need to be clear on for the citizens that are hopeful about a resolution here is the people that are living at the intersection of Bavaria and 82nd and County Road 18. It's just a matter of time before 82nd Street is improved, and there will be traffic. That traffic is going to be there. It's going to be probably significant, and the intersection of 82nd Street and Bavaria will be a busy intersection. It's a matter of time. So this is not going to be the killer of that intersection. It's going to happen anyway. The cards are on the table. So you're going to have 82nd Street. It's going to be a main thoroughfare
Okay, so,
eventually.
oh, I'm sorry, you done?
Yes.
It sounds like we have consensus then. Council members jump in if I've got this wrong, but basically, Doug, I think the direction is take your letter, add in language to the effect that the City of Victoria and the council supports the Gedney site so long as the City of Chaska and the City of Chanhassen councils raise no objections to that site. For the reasons cited, and I would add maybe a fifth bullet point in that site is probably the most cost-effective site. I don't see that called out here, but I think that's probably important to add. Council, any objections or changes to that?
No changes, but also I guess I'm asking a question. Is the request that they table the vote scheduled for a week from tomorrow, is that still a part of this overall communication back to the count?
I would like to see that included. I'd like to see all 5 county commissioners vote on this, and tabling the vote for a couple of weeks, I think is a good idea. So I would support including that. Is that in the letter?
It's not in the letter, and I agree. I think that both pieces go to them.
I think it will be in the letter. Mr. Mayor, what about the second choice? Is there a second choice of the county property in Cologne or not? That's what I'm not sure on.
I think we're not as in favor of that. I don't want to put words in the other council members' mouth. I think that clearly everybody supports the Gedney property. Let's start there and see what happens. And then if that doesn't work, we can always look at this again. Council, any objection to that?
No objection.
Okay, so let's take that approach. So Doug, language again. City of Victoria Council supports this so long as the City of Chaska and the City of Chanhassen councils have no objections. The vote should be delayed until all 5 commissioners can be there to vote. And then finally, add in a fifth bullet point that says the Gedney property appears to be the most cost-effective solution.
Okay.
Is that all clear?
Yep.
Okay, do you need a vote on that, or is that enough direction?
That's good.
Okay, before I close that out, Council, any other comments on this? All right.
Mr. Mayor, on second thought, let me have a vote on that so I can say that in the letter that you're taking that position.
All right, without repeating everything I say, I move that we make the changes this council has just discussed in the draft letter that Doug had given us. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The council passed it unanimously. Yep. Next item, reports of the city mayor. Reports of the city manager. I'm sorry, Doug, go ahead.
Mayor, I don't think I have anything.
Okay. Bob, city attorney reports.
Yeah, no, Mayor, I think I've said enough. I'm done for the night.
Councilmember Crowley, report.
No report.
Councilmember Striegel.
No report.
Councilmember Vogt.
Just a comment, I really enjoyed Stan Tequila's meeting here last Thursday, his talk on wolves, coyotes, and foxes. It was a great meeting put on by the Friends of the Victoria Library. We need more of those, and I can't wait for the next one.
Thank you. Councilmember Gregory.
No report.
I have no report. I move we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Would you?